Everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we get going tonight, just want to introduce our participants up front for you this evening. I'm going to start at my far right with Miss Lynn Town, our clerk of the board. To my immediate right is Dr. Steve Cook, our superintendent. To my left is Lisa May, our vice chair. Tambra Pickford, trustee. Jen Brumley, trustee. And Rebecca Smith, trustee. My name is Casey Morserow, and I'm the board chair. Public comment on district-related items is scheduled near the start of this meeting. Please sign in on the sheet provided at the entrance door. Note that because of the diversity of issues, members of the board will not respond to public comment tonight. Instead, issues may be recorded and referred to the proper staff person for follow-up. Comments may also be submitted to the board in writing through the clerk. Okay. We're going to do oath of office first. Is that right? Or agenda? Okay. So is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Okay. So this is our annual meeting. They used to be in July, but they're in January. So we have a little bit of housekeeping we have to do here first. And the first item up here is oath of office for our newly declared trustees, which is Ms. Pickford and myself. We are starting new terms tonight. So. Yep. Go at the same time.
Both at the same time. Unprecedented. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America
and the Constitution of the State of Idaho,
and the Constitution of the State of Idaho,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties
of school board trustee
of school board trustee
to the best of my ability.
to the best of
my
my
ability.
There you go. Congratulations.
Ms. Town?
Thank you.
4 more years.
Okay. Just get organized here. So, since this is our annual meeting, we need to take care of kind of clerk, treasurer, board chair, vice chair, set our meeting dates, and there is a sheet on that in our board packet with all the motions, and we'll just go in order of that sheet. So first up is going to be board chair. Before we do that, I'll just say it's been my pleasure to serve as the board chair for the last 3.5 years, and I'm willing to do so again just because of all the stuff we have going on, but I'm also willing to not do it if you so choose. So I'll let you guys make that call, or if anyone else is interested, let us know, and we'll go through. But let's start with chair.
Just doing one at a time or the whole slate?
Now we'll do them one at a time.
I move to elect Casey Morserow board chair for the 2020 calendar year.
All right, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
All right. And vice chair, do the same thing. Anyone interested in serving as vice chair?
I would be. For the record, yes. I would be interested in serving as vice chair.
Okay. Is there a motion for Ms. Brumley?
I move to elect Ms. Brumley to serve as board vice chair for the 2020 calendar year.
Okay, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No. No.
Okay. All right, the rest of these, the language is all there for us. So if we can just move through those. Someone wants to take those on?
I move to elect Catherine Ebner, treasurer for the 2020 calendar year.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to elect Lynn Town, clerk of the board, for the 2020 calendar year.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to designate Lynn Town as custodian of public records for the 2020 calendar year.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Almost there.
I move to appoint Pamela Westberg as acting clerk in the event of the absence of the board clerk for the 2020 calendar year.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, a couple more here.
I move that the regular meeting of the board for the calendar year 2020 be the first Monday of the month at 5 p.m. at the Midtown Center Meeting Room, 1505 North 5th Street, Coeur d'Alene, unless otherwise posted for public notice in advance of the meeting.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
I move that the third Monday of the month be set aside for special meetings, workshops, and/or forums as needed.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. If only it were only the third Monday, right? Okay, and last one here. It's a long one.
I move to designate the District Administration Office as the public place for posting of this board's public notices. Additionally, notices will be posted in the main lobby at Midtown Center and the District 271 website. The Coeur d'Alene Press and the Spokesman Review newspapers will be provided the meeting agendas at the time of the posting.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Okay, now on to the good stuff. Board recognition. Dr. Cook, I'm going to let you start first here, if you would, please.
All right. This evening, the board would like to recognize one of the school district's oldest and closest community partners, Panhandle Health District. So if you guys could all come on up. Old. I like that. Oldest. Yeah, no clapping yet. We got to celebrate this the right way. All right. All right. So first of all, you don't have a whole squad here, but Laura Whalen, District Director, Don Duffy, Public Health Services Administrator, Nick Swope, Health Promotions Program Manager, have come to attend with us tonight. Panhandle Health District offers comprehensive public health services focusing on creating healthy people and healthy communities. This agency has partnered with Coeur d'Alene School District many times for over 50 years. In the last 2 years especially, Panhandle Health District has worked with us to champion and support public health causes such as mental health and wellness, suicide prevention, addressing the opioid crisis, preventing communicable and infectious diseases, and immunizing children. The Suicide Prevention Action Network works in our community to prevent suicide. SPAN, as it's otherwise known, has partnered with us to provide training in QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer. Thank you, Don Duffy, Laura Whalen, Jill Ainsworth, Tina Giraduzzi. Did I get that right? Catherine Hoyer. Tina is also a health education guest speaker in our secondary schools, and we thank her for that as well. We also want to recognize Nick Swope, Lisa Hilsky, and several health district interns for their efforts to improve the rates of adequately immunized students in our community. Panhandle has assisted with gathering and entering immunization data and has partnered with us to offer after-hours immunization clinics for the convenience of families. Super One Foods donated ice cream coupons, and Panhandle handed them out as rewards for getting their kids immunized. Thank you as well to Catherine and Lisa for appearing in public service announcements with the school district to promote back-to-school immunizations. Amy Hurdle, Kelsey Orlando, and Linda Harder have all led community projects to improve the health of families, decrease substance abuse, and educate people regarding tobacco use and nicotine use. The school district has been able to participate in these efforts and provide our input as well. Panhandle works collaboratively with our Hope on the Homefront team to reach the highest need families in our area. The health district has attended Boer Elementary School Spring Fling, Lakes Giving at Lakes Middle School, and other school events to bring services and awareness of programs such as Women's Health Check Program, breast cancer screening vouchers, smoking cessations classes, diabetes self-management, and the Women and Infant Children Program and Care Plus Clinic. Finally, we'd like to thank Jeff Lee and David Hilsky, both epidemiologists at the Health District, for providing us resources and direction in responding to disease diagnosis and outbreaks. Panhandle Health District's ongoing educational programming and direct support to our schools benefits so many in this community. Thank you again for your continued commitment to public health and well-being. And on behalf of our Board of Trustees, we would like to present you with the Board's Leadership Award. I would love to have Laura talk just a little bit about this partnership and the work that we're doing in this community because it is that important.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Mr. Board Chair, members of the board, Nicole, and just your whole community. We are so pleased that there's such leadership at the at the school district in conjunction with the health district because we're natural partners, and together we do great things. So thank you.
You guys?
Well, we have multiple collaborative meetings at the Health District, and we see so many of the Coeur d'Alene School District that take time to attend. Nicole I just attended a meeting with her today regarding our opioid use disorder that we're following. So thank you so much for supporting us.
It's such a pleasure to get to be on the front lines working with our frontline staff that gets to really interface not only with a lot of the Coeur d'Alene School District staff, but also with students. So we're always beneficial. I get the wonderful opportunity to be kind of boots on the ground and actually look at all of the great impact that we're able to do, not just because we're a single organization, but because we decide to collaborate and work together.
Thank you again, guys. Let's give them one more round of applause. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I'm going to ask Amy Voller, I saw you out there, hi Amy, to come up to the podium with the Coeur d'Alene Education Partnership.
Good evening. Good evening. Is it on? Yeah. Good evening, Chair Morris Rowe, Honorable Trustees, and Superintendent Cook. I'm Amy Voller, Chair of the Coeur d'Alene Education Partnership. With me are the most incredible, dedicated group of people I know in Coeur d'Alene, and I'm honored to work with them. Allow me to introduce our CEP board who's here with us tonight. Not everyone is here. We do have our treasurer, Hale Fields. You can wave. Our Director of Strategic Planning, Hannah Tagliaferro. Our Communications Chair, Kirsten Pomerantz. Our Chair at Large, Michelle. Becca, thank you. And our Outreach Chair, Steve Casey. This past October, CEP hosted our 6th annual fundraiser book clubbing, formerly known as Disco Inferno, in support of Coeur d'Alene school libraries. We enjoyed a Mad Hatter's tea party of fun, food, music, and dancing. We want to thank Superintendent Cook and Trustee May for attending the event. Our thanks also to Trustee Brumley and Trustee Pickford for your support of this event. On behalf of our presenting sponsor, Geno Construction, and our many generous community sponsors and donors, we are thrilled to present a check to the Coeur d'Alene School District in the amount of $22,440. We desire that this amount be evenly distributed among each of the 17 school libraries so that each library will receive $1,320. Though Venture does not have a school library, we continue to include them in our annual donation to be used for classroom reading materials. This most recent event now brings the total CEP donation to the school libraries to nearly $150,000 over 6 years. CEP remains at heart an organization that strives to keep public education issues at the forefront of the community through efforts to inform and unite. CEP is not primarily a fundraising organization, but our annual fundraising event has enabled us to support a program that benefits every school in the district. We are honored to be a partner of the school district. We thank you and the dedicated, amazing librarians of the Coeur d'Alene School District for all you do for our students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Voller and Coeur d'Alene Education Partnership. We certainly appreciate your support. Okay, Ms. Pickford, do you have our Invest, Inspire, and Innovate awards?
I do. Along with helping our libraries, Coeur d'Alene Education Partnership, along with Panhandle Kiwanis, also helps us honor a Teacher of the Month every single month throughout the year. And this involves surprising the teacher who has no idea that someone has written in all these wonderful things about, you know, why they should be honored. And it's always such a joy to go in there and surprise these teachers as they see a ton of people walking in. And sometimes they don't always see the balloons, and sometimes they're just like, what the heck's going on? But anyways, we thank them for that as well. So our first Teacher of the Month is Marla Nixon, a PE teacher at Bora Elementary for November. The next Teacher of the Month is Dale Johnson, a 6th grade teacher at Woodland Middle School. And then our next Teacher of the Month is Tim Sanford, a music teacher at Lake City High School. This one was pretty funny. He thought he was being evaluated. And so he was all prepared and then was like, I had everything cleaned up. And so anyways, it was awesome. And then the next Teacher of the Month is Kelly Martin, a kindergarten reading teacher at Dalton Elementary. And then we have Melanie Taylor, a special education teacher at Camfield Middle School. I didn't attend this, but I heard there were tears involved in this one. Yes. And then the next Teacher of the Month for December is Jacob Graham, a 10th grade English teacher at Coeur d'Alene High School. So please join me in congratulating our Teachers of the Month for November and December. No, I didn't.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pickford. Let's see, next up is high school student body reports. Is there anyone from Venture here tonight? Okay, I didn't have you in my notes. How about K-Tech? Okay, I'll let you ladies go first. So if you haven't been with us before, just if you'll head over to the podium, just make sure the red light's on the microphone there. And welcome.
Okay, do I press this? Oh, hi. Well, I'm Alexis Keelan. I go to K-Tech, and I'm a part of the Resort Academy. There's tons of different parts of K-Tech, the different classes that you can take, and I'm in the Resort Academy. We work with the Coeur d'Alene Resort, and we work in different departments, so it has really given us cool industry experience. I first want to thank the Coeur d'Alene School District for giving me the opportunity to be in the K-Tech Resort Academy. It's given me the ability to work in the different departments of the Coeur d'Alene Resort, and I actually learned that I wanted to go into hospitality administration, and I'm actually going to Northern Arizona University and studying hotel and restaurant management because of this class. So I just want to thank you all for supporting me in doing that.
Hi, I'm McKenna Wiedmeyer, and I just want to say that I know many people that have gone to K-Tech and they have been able to pursue a career in the department that they chose, and it is a nice way to give kids a nice head start in what they want to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it's Fight for the Fish Week, right? So I'm going to have Lake City go first since you're the fish holders.
Good evening, esteemed board chair, honorable trustees, superintendent Cook, and district administration. My name is Carter Gordon, and I am the ASB treasurer at Lake City High School. Also with me tonight are Vice President Sam Putrin and Secretary Emily Damshin. President Jacob Baker is sick tonight and sadly could not be here. We've been busy at Lake City getting ready to host Fight for the Fish this Friday, and we'll be starting our Kiss the Fish fundraiser on Wednesday for our donation to the Human Rights Task Force during the games. We also have several things going on in our college and career office. Lake City is partnered with University of Idaho and North Idaho College to work with seniors through the entire enrollment process during their final semester at Lake City. Over the spring semester, each college will be at LC on several occasions to discuss topics including financial aid and scholarships, placements, and advising and registration. Ms. Del Gizi is also organizing the second annual Now and Next Summit to include an info night on March 16th and a career and technical roadshow on March 20th. Neighboring high schools are invited to both events, and over 75 industry and post-secondary professionals will be there. Make sure to mark your calendars because you would not want to miss these events. During the next few weeks, Ms. Del Gizi will also be going into classrooms to help students interpret their PSAT results, and she's partnering with the sophomore counselor to do classroom visits this week to work through career cruising activities. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you. And Coeur d'Alene High School.
Hello, school board. My name is Megan Corrett, and I'm the ASB president at Coeur d'Alene High School. And with me today is our treasurer, Geneva Bankston. Superintendent Cook, Chairman Morrisroe, and other senior members of the board, we thank you for having us here today. We wrapped up school 2 weeks ago with our Christmas Spirit Week. This included days such as North Pole Day, where we could dress up like an elf, a Santa, present, or a reindeer. We had Ugly Sweater Day. We had Malay Kaliki Maka Day. Christmas Morning, which was Pajama Day. And also Hit the Slopes, where we dressed up like skiers. This week is Fight for the Fish Spirit Week. We started off today with College Spirit Day, so lots of kids wore their favorite colleges. And tomorrow we are partnering with Sources of Strength and having Orange Day. Orange is the color for family and also the color for human rights, and so that fit well with the Fight for the Fish theme. On Wednesday, we are having Country versus Country Club Day, so kids can either dress up like a golfer from a country club or they can dress up like a cowboy. And then on Thursday, we are having Name Day. So for example, my name is Megan, so I could dress up like as Megan the Mermaid or Megan the Martian. And then on Friday, we are having Fight for the Fish Spirit Day. I would like to invite all of you guys to see all the hard work we've put into Fight for the Fish, and we hope you join us on Friday at the game. Upcoming is finals week. All the seniors are getting ready to finish their first semester of senior year. We are doing all the preparation stuff. We're finishing our senior papers currently, and we are just starting our senior project. So we'll be mentoring with different advisors and people throughout the community that will job shadow underneath them. We also have our Sadie Snowball on February 8th. And then in April, our prom has been moved to April 11th. And then following that, we have Buff and Tough on April 15th and Sunrise Sunset on April 20th. We also have the Viking Country auction on March 14th, which we invite all of you guys to come to. This is a great event that supports a lot of our clubs and raises a lot of money. And we would also like to give a big shout out to all of our Fight for the Fish sponsors. That includes Navimation, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, Brian Goetz with State Farm, Idaho Trust Bank, Warman Forest Management, Tailor Made Salon, Zag Incorporated,
Specialty Recreation and Marine, Standcraft Wooden Boats, Impact Case and Container, Integrity Home Improvement, and Dutch Bros. We thank all of our sponsors, and we hope to see you at Fight for the Fish. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you for all of our high school students for coming down tonight. And Lake City and Coeur d'Alene High, good luck to both of you. We'll see you Friday. All right, next up, Kim Ziegler with the Coeur d'Alene Education Association report.
I love my ability to clear a room. Good evening and Happy New Year to Board Chair Morris Rowe, esteemed members of the board, Superintendent Cook, Miss Town, district employees, and the public. Thank you for allowing me to be here to present again this evening. Tonight I have a celebration to share with you from our 8th grade middle school science departments from Canfield and Woodland. This year, the science department was allowed to use their professional development funds to attend the 2019 National Science Conference in Seattle, Washington, from December 12th to the 13th. This is what they asked that I share with you. Being a language arts teacher, I did proofread it and edit it first. In going to this conference with Building Professional Development Monies, we had the opportunity to discuss scientific topics with fellow science teachers from across the Northwest. We love that aspect of going to a national conference. The huge takeaway for us as teachers included watching students researching phenomena and applying it to scientific methods through investigation. We also took notice of the workshop model being used at the conference by the presenters, which solidified that using this models in our classrooms will help students with synthesizing concepts. The workshop model incorporates thinking strategies, using and creating schema, drawing educated inferences, asking questions, and determining the importance of the information that is gathered while invoking and deepening meaning and knowledge. Overall, we left this conference excited to be science teachers and feeling valued by our district. Thank you to the public, the school district administrators, and the school board for the additional personal development dollars in our last levy. Thank you for your time tonight. That's all I have for you.
Thank you, Kim. Welcome back. Okay, so trustee comments here, and I have one. Do you guys mind if I go first? Okay, so is Dyson Rhodes and Brenda Listman here? Hey, I'm going to ask you guys to come up front and meet me if you don't mind. Okay, so Dyson, is a bus driver in our district, and Brenda is an aide on the same bus. Is that correct? Okay. So just before Christmas, you may have read, there was a letter to the editor in the Coeur d'Alene Press from Sue Nasir of Dalton Gardens. And Sue wrote in to share an act of kindness that she witnessed involving one of our school buses and their crew, which were these two fine folks. And so we want to invite them here tonight just to celebrate them and what they did. So here's what Sue had to write in the paper. At 9:15 Thursday, snowing and icing, a young student went down 4th Street on his bike. He was wearing a heavy backpack and slipped on the ice. He had trouble getting up and seemed hurt. We tried calling out to offer help, but he could not hear us. Before we could reach him, a Coeur d'Alene School District bus driver with several cars behind it had seen this happen and pulled over to offer help. The boy was reluctant to leave his bike. My husband went to help and offered to keep the bike safe here and encouraged the boy to go with the driver and to call his mother to let her know what happened. They convinced him to take the bus to school. The bus driver did a great service, and we were so impressed. He went out of his way. Thanks for helping. And we agree. So 2 of our employees that day, as I said, this was a special needs bus in our district, and they stopped, and that was Dyson Rhodes and Brenda Listman. Please help me in celebrating them. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Okay. All right, public comment. Let me find my. Okay, so now's the time for public comment. I'd just like to remind the public, while this is a meeting of the Board of Trustees that takes place in public, it is not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting of the board to conduct district business. The board does allow some limited public comment on district-related items. Those wishing to address the board during the public comment period are limited to one comment not to exceed 3 minutes. If you have additional comments that you would like to present to the board, please provide those comments in writing through the clerk of the board, Ms. Lynn Town. She will ensure that board members receive the additional commentary. Please keep in mind that board members will not respond to public comment. If I determine that an individual statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, or repetitive, I may terminate that speaker's privilege to address the board. So we have a few people signed up. I'll kind of loosely keep time up here, and if you're getting close to that 3-minute mark, I'll just ask you to wrap it up as quick as you can, please. First up, and it's smeared on here a little bit, Jake Goringer, is that right? Good evening, sir. If you'll just make sure the mic's on there, so it should be a little red light above the button. Thank you.
Chair Morris Rowe, members of the Board of Trustees, good evening. My name is Jake Geringer. I'm Governor Brad Little's North Idaho Field Director, and it's my pleasure to be here this evening to introduce myself and to provide a few highlights from the Governor's State of the State address this afternoon. As you may know, education is Governor Little's top priority, and he has recognized that it's a constitutional and moral obligation of the state of Idaho to provide K-12 education in a high-quality manner. Among the other educational investments the governor laid out today, he has recommended a $30 million to build out the career ladder for Idaho's most experienced teachers, $7.7 million for the second year of funding to increase starting teacher pay to $40,000 per year, $3.2 million increase to make his investment in literacy support ongoing, and $1 million to provide professional development and resources to better serve students facing social and emotional challenges. The governor is making these recommendations in light of a state spending reset, and to be clear, the spending reset does not impact K-12 funding. So in addition to being here this evening, I just want to make sure it's clear that I'm here in North Idaho full-time, and I'm happy to meet with each of you to take your feedback, your input, answer questions as the legislative session moves forward. Thank you.
Jake, can you leave your contact information with the clerk or a card? Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for being here, and thanks to the governor for his recommendations he rolled out today. Okay, next up, Marie Nail.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Cook, school board trustees, and Ms. Town for the opportunity to address you tonight. My name is Marie Nail. I'm a parent of 2 children at Fernand STEM Academy. I've been active in my school's PTA the past 6 years. I'm a past board member of the Coeur d'Alene Education Partnership, and I've also worked as a substitute teacher in the Coeur d'Alene School District. Currently, I serve on the district's long-range planning, SPARK, and boundary review committees. I am a Coeur d'Alene native and attended our public schools, grades 1st through 12, go T-Wolves. I am passionate about the education our entire community receives, and I believe all students should be afforded equal opportunities. I was quoted in the press today on what I view as an imbalance of equity in our system. We can talk a lot about the problems, and we all have differing views, but what I would like you to consider is a solution. The first step to that is to ensure that the Long Range Planning, Boundary Review Committee, and the school board all recognize the problems and get on the same page to work towards a solution. I am committed to being part of this solution. With the results of the recent curriculum audit, community survey, and a professional consultant overseeing a committee of 38 members comprised of a representative from every school in the district, we have the tools, the data, and the passion to help our Coeur d'Alene community. the Boundary Review Committee has been tasked with providing a recommendation to our superintendent and the school board about our attendance zones. I'm asking tonight that the board allow the Boundary Review Committee an opportunity to discuss the issues that face our district and provide recommendations to the board, including how magnet schools will be zoned. Restricting that input will inhibit the committee's ability to come up with a comprehensive and complete recommendation for the entire district. Our community is growing and changing. This is a perfect opportunity to successfully steer our school district into the next decade. Lastly, I want to thank you all for your service to our community and the role you have taken. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nail. All right, next up is Sarah McCracken. Good evening.
Hi, I wanted to thank you guys for your service, but also thank you for the time for public comment. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I'm also a lifelong resident of Coeur d'Alene, product of the Coeur d'Alene School District, and I also serve on the Long Range Planning Committee and the Boundary Review Committee. I want to speak tonight a little bit about a different edge of the imbalance that is in the school district regarding the zoning for elementary schools. Our current elementary school capacity with portables or without portables is 5122. There are currently 5148 students enrolled at the elementary school level. Between Sorensen and Ramsey, there are 1,049 students attending those two schools. This makes only 4,073 zoned seats. What does that mean for the other almost 1,050 students? This is about 20% of the elementary school students that don't have a guaranteed home school that they are zoned for. My family is in this situation, and we have been in it for the last 5 years. We've not had a home school for the entire time my daughter has been in elementary school. Each year each year our school has been overcrowded, starting with when we were in the landings zone for Skyway. That school was full, and we were offered to go to Atlas, but each year we had to apply for a transfer to be able to stay at Atlas. We moved about a mile away when my daughter was in 3rd grade and my son was going into 1st. Our family priorities were for both of our kids to go to the same school, to go to school with our neighbors, and not to move schools each year. It seems pretty simple. When presented with options to where we can go for the 2017-2018 year, the year after we moved, these were the options and the order they were offered. 1 kid at Winton, 1 at Bryan. 1 at Bryan, 1 at Bora. 1 at Winton, 1 at Bora. Both kids at Atlas, but no guarantee of where we would be the next year. The last option was both kids at Ramsey and the option that they can stay for their entire elementary school years. The only reason why that was an option for them to stay is because it was a magnet school. The way that we were offered these choices was during district enrollment meetings that happened the week before school starts. We would get a call at work, be presented with an option, the first 3 being to separate our kids. I would say that I prefer my kids to be together, wait for a call back, be presented with another option, on and on. A pretty stressful situation for our family. The last option was the only option that would guarantee that our kids go to the same school and for us not to move schools each year. And I've heard dozens of family in the same situation, being in the northern side of the district. Most of these decisions being made just days before school start make it hard for families to coordinate care, after school, transportation, purchasing uniforms if needed, etc. With the exception of the magnet schools, the district policy requires you to repeat this process every year since you're not guaranteed a spot to stay when you're moved to another school. Until I was on the Long Range Planning Committee, I didn't quite understand how many families were affected by this issue. For example, Winton has a zone of over 1,000 students and the school holds 460. More than 50% of their zone is being transferred out. Priority with an overlay doesn't guarantee a spot, and as the district, we are at capacity. We do not have the capacity or luxury to afford choice. With only 26 seats remaining without ranking or without portables, we only have 26 seats remaining, or opening buildings that you have intended to close. There really isn't room to move students without ranking choice over a student's ability to have a homeschool and a safe learning environment that they are guaranteed a spot in. You have an excellent committee of volunteers on both committees that I serve on, a consultant that the taxpayers have paid over $120,000 for, and an opportunity to address a multitude of problems with the zoning and changing the zoning that we have now. I hope that we could spend these resources and work towards a solution instead of ignoring the challenges and limiting the scope of the committee in a way that will not allow them to work towards a solution. Unless we consider that all schools will have attendance zones, there's not a way to guarantee each student a home school. Unless we consider, I guess the math doesn't work out unless we build more schools. The opportunity to serve on this committee, I think, is great, and I appreciate it. We've also had community surveys and a curriculum audit that have both pointed out the desire for neighborhood schools and equity among these schools. I hope that we can get there, and I'm very happy to help in this process. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And last up here is Shauna Marshall.
Hello, board members, Dr. Cook, and our community members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. We had some glitches with our printers today in the school district, so I couldn't get my thing to print. So I'm going to see if I can read it off my phone. We'll see how my old lady eyes do. I've taught in our school district for 15 years, and I'm also a parent of 6 children who went through the district, kindergarten through 12th grade in several different schools. And I'm here today just a little rushed and but kind of surprised about all of the things that I've heard over the last couple weeks about Sorensen. So I'm just kind of here to kind of share some of my initial thoughts in an opportunity to clear up some misconceptions, hopefully, and continue a dialogue. Sorensen seems to have come under attack lately, and I'm here really to invite the board and our community into a conversation with the Sorensen staff regarding what is true and special about our little downtown school. No one has come to talk directly with our staff about our school in years. So it's no secret that back in 2005, Sorensen was a failing school by every single measure. And when the district wanted to close our school, the staff, family, and downtown community rallied immensely together to start an arts magnet school. Most of the homes around Sorensen were boarded up at that time. We spent thousands of hours as a staff researching best practices for turning around a failing school. We planned before and after school every week of the summer for several summers and for years upon years to be where we are today. The school district at that time gave us several measures that we had to meet in order to stay open every single year. We had to raise all of our own money for all of our own programs, increase our enrollment by measured percentiles every year, and we had to increase our student achievement data by measured increases every year. And year after year, since 2005, we've met or exceeded every one of those expectations. We've done everything that our school district and our community has asked of us with an eager and loving heart for the kids and families that we serve. We cannot control the real estate. We cannot control rent prices downtown. We cannot control the economy. We can't control what happens at any other school. All we can do is strive to impact what happens at our school. The rumors that we have heard in the last couple weeks thrown at the Sorensen staff and community have been really upsetting to our staff and our families. I listened to it for a couple hours after school today. Sorensen parents, number one, Sorensen parents buy their way into the school. False. We are a free public school, and teachers have always loved and taught whatever student has walked through our doors, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Number two, Sorensen waits until tax returns are filed to choose our student lists. False. Our open enrollment dates are set by the district, not by us. Sorensen seeks out higher socioeconomic families. False. We have zero input in what kids come through our door. We did not set the lottery priority system that was set by the school district at the time. Number four, Sorensen raises outrageous amounts of funds that go directly into our classrooms. False. Every single penny that's raised at our auction goes to our Magnet Funds Committee, which consists of parents, staff members, and community members for oversight. 100% of these funds go only to arts programs, and it cannot be used for anything else. I cannot use 1 penny of an auction fund to buy a math book. So we're all left a little puzzled at the current outrage. We did what we were asked to do. We turned around a failing school using best practices, data, and really hard work. We listened to our community. We created an art school that shares the values of our downtown community and our business members. If the argument is that there are some higher socioeconomic families from other schools' attendance zones that instead choose to give their money to Sorensen, that's a falsehood as well. Those parents choose to be at Sorensen because of our arts programs. And a forced rezoning would not translate into a few parents going to a different school and doing the same recreation of our programs. Time and time again, we serve families that would instead go to private school, charter school, or be homeschooled. This issue should not be school against school. We don't want to have to defend ourselves against false claims. We just want to do our jobs and represent our district and our community well. We want to serve our students and our families well. And we should be looking at what's working in these schools and use that data to bring up any struggling schools. A few things that Sorensen does differently that impacts. A few things that Sorensen does differently that impacts the success of all of our students regardless of socioeconomic status. We have daily arts integrated instruction. Almost every teacher teaches a performance team or a creative club before and after school every single day of the week. We have artists in residence that teach our students about art history, art skills, all created with community partnerships. We have an all-school Friday gathering every week where students share on stage being celebrated, and this teaches our kids to be brave and confident. 69% of our teachers wrote Excel grants this year to fund other integrated learning experiences. 73% of our staff members applied for and were awarded master teacher premiums. We have 30 minutes extra contact time with students several days a week because our school day starts earlier at 8:30. And we have a 3-day per week arts and humanities block where kids get exposure to 11 different arts rotations. Everything I just mentioned is completely independent of anything provided to us by the school district. It's just things we choose to do as a staff and families and community because we know it works for kids. So why change what's working? Why does our success story have to be part of somebody else's problem or complaint? Changing what works here may solve a few temporary problems of equity percentages, but will ultimately result in opening a whole new set of issues of resentment and disengagement for hundreds of families. You can't create equity by bringing someone else down. Instead, we invite you to talk to us about what's working, about what it took to turn around our failing school, about what it looks like when your programs make kids love school so much that that translates into their growth. And we thank you for listening to this and look forward to an opportunity to have more conversations about what's working so we can be part of the solution. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marshall. Okay, we have our consent agenda up. And is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda items A through G? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'd just like to point out for Trustee Hearn that our school bus purchases are on there. 6 buses with seatbelts. So I know he would always bring that up. So Tom, if you're listening, they are with belts. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay. Motion carries. Finance item tonight, Dr. Cook. I know Ms. Ebner's not here with us tonight because of the conflicts. Are you handling that?
So I think if there's probably the easiest thing to do is if there's any questions that remain unanswered from that you guys want to know off the finance report, you can submit them to me or we can record them. We did answer quite a few of them. If you had a chance to look at that, we posted that in the board book later in the day today. And many of those were finance related. So if anybody has any questions, we're glad to at least write them down. Maybe I'll start there.
Okay, questions for Dr. Cook to write down? It sounded funny. Next month, are we back on our schedule of, we'll have kind of a special topic from finance?
Yeah, it's, we will, if you recall, our standard operating procedure has been to do monthly presentations and then also do the finance report each month. We will have preliminary kinds of things starting to look at. It's getting to be budget season, believe it or not. We'll have plenty for you guys to talk about in the next several months, especially. So,
I've got a question. You kind of triggered, I guess, there. So it falls under finance. So in the curriculum audit, there were a number of recommendations that had to deal with finance. And how funds were allocated and kind of performance-based budgeting and equity and those sorts of things. Maybe at some point we can look at how that's going to evolve our processes, and like maybe that could be our special topic for the month, as for one of these upcoming months as a Kickstarter.
Yeah, there's if you recall, one of the recommendations, it was one of the later in the process recommendations to actually build in a system that is performance-based budgeting. The idea being looking at how the money's being spent and are you getting return on investment for how that's going. That's absolutely a direction we're driving towards. One of the things that you've got to do that effectively, though, is to have systems in place that measures the efficacy and effectiveness of all the programs that you're implementing across the district, which is what we're working on right now. So this is iterative, but we can start talking about what that might look like here in the near future.
Okay. Anything else for Dr. Cook on that? All right. So action items then. First up is policies that were for action. These were two policies we saw last month, and they were out for public comment for the last 30 days. It looks like we received no comment on either one of those. So is there any, well, let's get a motion, I guess, first. So is there a motion to approve the policies and procedures as presented?
I'll move to approve policy 7440 and 7440F and 8200.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion in regard to these two policies, comments?
I just had a question on policy 8200. It mentions a committee or ad hoc group, including a board representative, and I wasn't sure that we've been doing that, and so if we wanted to leave it in there, let's find where it is. It might be under procedure. The wellness, there we go. It says, where the committee meets annually to discuss like wellness habits and who's included on the committee. Oh, what paragraph is that? Oh, a wellness committee appointed by the superintendent and/or designee shall be comprised of district, school board, administration, food service, physical education instructors, school health professionals, etc. Are we currently doing that?
Do you know which page are you on there?
It's page 5 of 8 under public involvement.
Page 175 of the packet.
Under
Local school wellness.
That's on 8200-1.
Correct.
I don't know at this time. I can definitely get some information and report back on that.
Since my time I've been on the board, we have not been doing this, and so I'm happy to, if we leave it in, but if we leave it in, then I think we should probably pursue it and follow the policy.
Sure.
I'm sorry, which paragraph is that in?
First paragraph.
Under the nutrition guidelines? Oh, no, public involvement there. Okay. Yeah, I don't think we've had board representation on that.
I'd be happy to be the board representative for that committee if we get it organized.
Thank you. When I read this, as I was proofreading policies, I asked the same question and have been assured by Mr. Ducar that this is a group that has been meeting. I think where we've fallen down is that there hasn't been a school board member invited to participate. So I will let him know that Miss May would like to participate and represent the board.
Any other questions or comments on those two policies? Okay, so it was moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries. We're on to page 2. And we're into info items. There wasn't much for action. Okay.
That was it.
All right, Dr. Cook, I'll turn this one over to you, I think, to start. Or is this just a preview?
This is a preview. I think one of the things I'd like to both kind of, I think, just set the stage for We're getting ready to have a conversation tonight in which we'll give some guidelines, if you will, or frame out some direction for the boundary committee. But the very next topic that will be coming to the boundary committee that will eventually, or that the boundary committee will be asking questions about, that I think is important for this board to consider is the what next question, which is, as they start to get things figured out, people are going to very quickly start asking, will we be afforded any kind of latitude with whether or not we would want to stay, and whether that's exclusion from transfer, or we're calling that grandfathering. That's the next natural question. And so one of the things that I just want to put in as a starting place is that a week from today is a conversation, I think, in which we are going to want to talk through what that might look like for this community. It could be anything from, there's absolutely not one aspect of grandfathering and whatever decision is made, all the way to you string it out for years and years and years, and nobody has to move until they're finished, and then maybe siblings move or something like that, or something in between. And I think that's part of what the committee is going to, on January 21st, our very first open house, that's going to be the very second question that's asked is, will my kid be impacted by this? And so one of the things that we wanted to make sure that the committee had at their ready was the result of a conversation, or at least a workshop, for us to have that dialogue and talk through where on that continuum things might be for kids as they move. And it does, the fact that we've found that there's some policy work that we need to do with regards to open enrollment and even some of the magnet school decisions, that there might even be some discussion about how that might interplay with those decisions. And so I just want to set the stage. That's going to be a really important conversation for us to have next week, and just make sure that we're prepared to give guidance, opine, and maybe give thoughts so that the boundary committee knows exactly what their sandbox is and what it isn't.
So thank you for previewing that. That's a week from tonight, 5 o'clock, Misstown, I believe, and here at Midtown, correct? Okay. So anything you all would like to see ahead of time or at that meeting that's going to help kind of guide that discussion? I know Trustee May before has talked about let's not reinvent the wheel, right? There's lots of other districts that have done this, and we have Flow as a consultant. Could they provide some kind of modeling and some samples of different policies or practices? And so I assume we'll have that information for us.
Yeah, right now we have, I think at our leisure, we have 4 different examples of districts across, I think, primarily the northwestern United States, that we have been given examples of how they've managed it in their particular rezoning. And it's almost in the same kind of model of extremely conservative to fairly liberal with the actions going forward. And I think that's just as something to see the modeling of the language, perhaps, but not necessarily as something that we would have to imitate one of any of the 4. It could be some combination thereof, but it's a pretty nice distribution of different ways that districts have handled it.
Could we maybe get some clarification on the history of what we've done in the past in this district as well, just so we know what people have experienced in the past? Might look different going forward, but I'd like to know the history.
Dr. Cook, is your expectation that it'll be, maybe not an action item, but it'll be a guiding principle?
Yeah, I think at this point we would be looking for some guidance to give, because it's going to interplay with the recommendations coming out of the committee. And I think if you give something almost like this is the exact language we'd be using, it's going to limit the parameters that the committee has. But I do think giving them some boundaries and then what it might look like potentially as they start to process that, I think that's going to be really important. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that we give hard and fast language. I think we give hard and fast guidance on what it is that the board would like to see out of the committee work. And as far as, in March 18th, Jed's going to stand in front of the podium and give recommendations that we hope has been run through the ringer in the committee with things like how are we going to best handle the transfer situation, the how does choice interplay with this, how do the magnet schools fit into it, what are the options regarding grandfathering some, all, not, any, whatever that looks like, and how does all of that come together and synthesize into a formal recommendation for what would be next for the school district. And remember, we're trying to fix, I think, a solution that solves a problem for years to come, not something that is a 2 or 3 year solution, but what we're trying to do is drive something that would give us guidance for the next 10 years.
I would request hearing your thought on it, that we allow for public comment that night. I think people will be very interested to let us know how they're feeling, and I feel like I probably can't make my best decision unless I have a sense for me of how the community is feeling. So I would request that we take public comment.
Yeah, and I think that we intend to live stream the grandfathering workshop, just because I think it's going to be an important dialogue for the board to have. I don't think it's a wise decision at a workshop to have public comment at that point, because I think we're still synthesizing kind of the position of the board at that point. But I do think, there will be 2 public hearings, if you will. Hearings are probably not the right way to put it. At least open meetings that we're recruiting and asking for people to come and give feedback to the committee on the 21st and 18th, I think, is the second one. I'm trying to do this from memory. And so there will be opportunities for the public to see and dig into and just look at and see what the committee's work is doing. And then there will be, I think, 1 more committee meeting, maybe 2 after that final open house, and then in March, the committee would be coming in front of this. And I would guess, at that point we have heard lots and lots from our community, but I don't know that it's necessarily any reason why we shouldn't continue to have public comment, as this is going to be a decision that will be significant for the future of our district. Right?
I feel like we have got lots of information, but the one area that we haven't solicited any information is on grandfathering. And so for me personally, if there's anybody listening, I would like to hear your feedback on grandfathering. Even if we're giving guiding principles, it's a realm that I've never dealt with before, and I'm sure every community, every school looks at it differently. And to be honest, I have no sense if it's an easy fix. People don't care. They'd rather make the break quickly, or if there's some real considerations and some issues for students that we should consider. And so, if you would like that to come prior to the meeting from the community, that's fine. But I feel like for me to make my best decision, I probably need some feedback from how the community is feeling. Or
here's a very simple example. If you make this decision as not a single person gets grandfathered, that's pretty harsh, I think, to some extent, because now it is what it is and everybody moves on from that point. But once it's over, and it's kind of a new day. On the other hand, you could say, all right, everybody that is willing to move, we're going to have them move, and but anybody that wants to stay, and or if they have siblings that want to stay, then you can be in the situation kind of like we are right now with out-of-district students, where we haven't allowed out-of-district students for quite some time, but because we allowed a kind of a liberal grandfathering approach, we still have over 250 out-of-district students in the district, even though we haven't accepted any new ones. And because that's kind of, but you do string that along for quite some time. And so it's not that one side of that is easier or more difficult for staff or for the schools to manage. It's that this is kind of a balancing. You got to do what works for the system. And if you take 260 kids out of our system, are some of the class sizes smaller? Yeah, by 260 kids when you consider 11,000 students, but that's also a commitment that I think we made at that time to those families, that we were going to honor that promise. And so I think is how do you balance that discussion? We're going to potentially have to do some things that might not be very pleasant, along with some things that, is there some middle ground where we do allow for some of that? And I think every one of those situations comes with its own sets of pros and cons, and we've got to be prepared to discuss those.
I've got a couple thoughts on it. So I think for next week, if if we don't have anything and it's a discussion, I think to me, it'll be difficult to receive comment. We may receive it, but it's going to be difficult to drive interest for people to comment because they don't know what we're thinking. So, typically we'd have, like when we put a policy out for public comment, we've kind of created a policy and we've put it out for public comment. One thing that I had thought of, because I'm concerned about meeting fatigue with asking community to come and give input, is that we try to tie it into the attendance zone committee when they're meeting on the 21st and February 18th, not have them take that public comment, but maybe, whether it's a separate area in the commons or it's in a classroom, that we have we have the board there and we're taking public comment on the grandfathering rules. So we're not burdening the committee with that work. And so they can focus on the attendance zones and what that looks like, and that we could be there to hear feedback and tweak whatever policy we might be thinking. And then I would say at some point we're going to need to take action on it because we want it to be policy, we want it to be firm, that we look to do that kind of when we approve whatever the attendance zones are. How do you feel about that, Trustee May?
I'm not comfortable commingling the two community forums we have unless we want to wait till it's over and then we could invite the community to participate. But I think people will be very interested to attend the session provided by the committee and Flow Analytics. And I'd like to listen and hear and see how that goes. So if we wanted to have it staggered after they finish that, I would be okay with that. But simultaneously, I don't think we're asking parents to separate themselves and attend to two very important issues.
Yeah, I sorry if I worded that wrong. I wouldn't say simultaneously. I guess I would say just at the same time, so we're not asking people to come 2 different nights and find babysitters 2 different nights, or those sorts of things, if we could do it at the same time. Because that's our hardest thing, right, is to get participation on a lot of these events. And I think right, that attendance zone, we're going to have people. Of everything we've done since I've been on the board, that's probably been the most well-attended event. And so we're going to have people there, so it'd be a nice time to kind of have a captive audience and get good feedback. Because if it's the same 10 people that we hear a lot of, it's good feedback, but is it well represented? It's hard to know. Is that a broad perspective or is that just their perspective? So I don't know. That's why I thought on that night if we could do something around.
So I just want to make sure I understand. You're talking about like out in the commons at CHS having the community meeting going on, and in a classroom over here, if you want to talk grandfathering, go see a board member. Is that what we're saying?
I think we're saying afterwards. So let's say the attendance zone is from 6 to 7. I don't know what.
Oh, I got you.
Flow
So
analytics
at 8:30, you guys are going to, like, anybody that wants to hang out and yell at a board member can go right in there, right? I got you. I see now. Okay.
Maybe we should go first. Do we want to try that? Do we want to set that up for that first meeting and see where it goes? And if it's, I think, we have time, right? Because we're looking at March, so we have a few months. If we try that for January 21st and it's unsuccessful, we can regroup for February and have a hearing just about grandfathering, or we could have, a workshop, whatever we want to call it, and separate them if it doesn't go well. Does that seem reasonable? Ms. May?
And I think if we continue to put out on the website, on email, that we are reading the comments that come in, and encourage that that kind of response as well. Let's put that out and make it its own blast or whatever we need to do.
And just to clarify, are you anticipating that we're going to have universal grandfathering for all schools, or are you anticipating magnet school grandfathering and open enrollment grandfathering? I think that going into the workshop is probably important that we clarify those expectations.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think that's, so right now, the way that policy exists is it's not clearly articulated how open enrollment and how magnet, what that bifurcation looks like if you were to choose to open enroll, or even as one of our public commenters stated, that if I just want to be in my neighborhood school, what does that look like, and what are my policy expectations? Right now, that's not declared in policy. And so I think one of the things that we can do along the way as we're building this understanding about how we're going to transition into this is to also build policy that accommodates and makes pretty clearly articulated what those expectations look like in case a community member does say, okay, for example, I live in my zone school, I want to go to my zone school, can I go to my zone school, period. And right now the answer to that is probably. That as one of our commenters stated, that was very problematic for their family. I want to go to a magnet school. Is there a process for me to go to one of these magnet schools? And right now the answer is probably. And so what that looks like and how that is declared and what are those priority listings, every one of those I would suggest needs to come before the board for the board's final say on what that guidance looks like. And we're working on those policies to clearly separate so that those are not commingled and that they are not tangling with each other, that attendance zones and open enrollment and magnet enrollment are very specifically different processes. So, yes.
So I guess, the expectation is that we will have different processes for all of those things next Monday.
We will have examples of those policies, I think, ready for you guys to look at in a draft form by our February meeting.
You're talking, that's of the policies.
Of the policies, right.
She's saying the grandfathering rules, are you?
We will not have the grandfathering rules ready to go. What I'm talking about is you can't have the grandfathering without having clear expectations around what the policies are. The policies have to come, at least kind of a general understanding on the policies has to come first. Right. No, I mean, we can start talking about the general idea of grandfathering, absolutely. But what our final decision would have to be, all these things have to kind of come together. Yeah, that's what I was saying. So sorry, I wasn't clear.
Did that answer your question?
No, that's okay.
I think it's grandfathering. Is it going to be the same rules at magnet schools and traditional schools, neighborhood schools? I guess that's what you're asking, right?
I think if we're setting expectations for the community that work and for the community, that will be the second question asked. And so.
Yeah, and I think we need to look at the policy before we make that final decision. But I think the likelihood is that the answer to that is yes, but I'm not prepared to say 100% exactly that it is, because one of the things we don't have right now in place is a set of prioritizations that would fit even with the new, like if the proposed model, and now we're starting to get into getting ready to do our next conversation, which is we currently have a proposed model that our current procedures for allocation of students into the magnet schools would not apply to. And so we have to make sure that that's modified before. So I think the answer to your question is probably it will be identical, but until we know on the policies for sure, that can't be 100% yes.
I think, for me, part of that, at least on the magnets, where it hasn't been grounded in policy because that work was never done, it's been in the application process. And so I think we have some commitments we've made through the application process that we're going to have to live by. And currently those commitments are different than what we do in our neighborhood schools. And so I think some of that's just shaking that out. To me, we've got to live by those commitments, and then it's what do we do with our neighborhood schools. I think as we have this conversation next week, one thing that's going to be important, because I think when you think about this, you kind of think that the two traditional paths for grandfathering, or maybe it's three, it's this was my home school and now something else is my home school. So that's one person. We have magnet folks, and then we have people who've choiced into a school that maybe isn't their home school and isn't a magnet school, but they've choiced from Hayden Meadows to Bryan or Atlas or whatever it is. And how are we grandfathering those people? And those are the three I think of most often. And then today I ran into a neighbor and they said, well, I was forced transferred. And so what happens to me if I want to stay where I was forced transferred because I don't want to disrupt my kid? And Miss McCracken, brought that up where they had potentially 4 years in a row, they were in 4 different schools because of forced transfers. There wasn't room in their home school. And, I think that's another elephant in the room you got to kind of address, because those people, they've already been burdened. We did them wrong to a degree. We force transferred them, and so are they going to be treated someone different than someone who choice transferred? And it's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we recognize, like right now, the way that we're administering this, the most concrete example is once you're in a magnet school, you're in, and you send in I think it's called not a consideration, it's confirmation. Thank you, a confirmation of enrollment, and it's essentially a contract of attendance, right? That actually currently right now has more weight than even I live in the Dalton zone, I want to go to Dalton, and I'm likely to go to Dalton, but not an absolute guarantee. And I think that's part of the issue. It's a timing thing. And so part of why this is complicated, and it's not as simple as one of those is more important than the other, is it's what are those guiding parameters? And when we say, if you five want to say that the single most important thing is once you're in a magnet school, you're always in a magnet school, or once you choice into a school from any other school, that's a driving factor. Or if you want to say you can always go to your home school, each one of those things is a prioritization that could potentially push somebody down a list or out of a school. And so that's the part that I think it'd be nice, and what we may be able to do in one school may not be able to be done in another school because of the population, the total number of kids, et cetera, and it can vary even from grade level to grade level. So I think there's a lot of moving parts here that I want to make sure that we're calling them out, right? Like, we're going there and we're doing this very publicly and very transparently, and we want to do the best we can to serve our community, but also in a way that lasts for quite some time in the future. And as we continue to build schools, can accommodate that without having we don't want to do this again if we're building a new elementary school in 2.5 years. We don't want to start from scratch. We should be able to have a prediction of what that impact might look like.
So I'd maybe just reiterate what Ms. Smith, Trustee Smith, said about kind of what is current practice, and just add in what is current practice regarding forced transfers, and what are we telling those folks when we force transfer them, just so we're thinking about that too, because that's a different angle I hadn't thought of today until the neighbor and Ms. McCracken. So thank you. You may. Was that your little hand raised back there?
I just wanted to offer some clarification. I think when we were having the discussion early on this year with just the overcrowding in our elementary schools and where were we and how were we shuffling, I presented the board with a list of priorities that the elementary administrators have been using for the last several years, absent a real clear policy. What are the priorities when we think about children and what happens to them? And if you recall that list, at the top, what were I think on the top three were kids who are coming from some pretty fragile families, and we talked a little bit about what that actually means, but also forced transfer kids. And the reason for that is because of the disruption that was described tonight. So I feel like it's important to at least remind our community that our elementary administrative team has worked really hard understanding how much craziness that creates for children and their families when every year there's a different school in a different community. So those children who are forced transferred, our priority list said that we honor their desire to stay in that forced transfer school if they so choose. What we weren't able to do is to guarantee them transportation there, though, as well. So there were no great solutions, and things were pretty sticky, but I just wanted to bring that up, and I'd be happy to maybe reshare with the board that list of priorities that were our guiding kind of priorities.
Yeah, I think for certain we should have that. We should have the application process around the magnets, just to remind us of kind of what there is, because there's some prioritization there. And we may be able to do something similar on grandfathering, because we're not going to be able, it may be challenging to grandfather everybody, so there may need to be some ranking. And then also choice. I think around the choice application, there's some prioritization there as well.
And Dr. Cook, I wonder if it's possible, they're able to run every number, it seems, but, with the models that you guys present, like fifth graders stay plus a sibling for 1 year, whatever, some of those parameters that you sent to us, can they run the numbers on the time it would take with their system on, to transition through?
I think the data is only good as the input, right? If we said we're going to, and this is just an example. If we were going to say, all right, we're going to only allow grandfathering for every fifth grader that wants to stay, or every fifth grader and every eighth grader that wants to stay in their current schools, that is a very easy number to pull and give. But the second that we start saying, we start wrapping in forced transfers, and we start wrapping in siblings, and we start wrapping in if you choose, then now we've got to go out and find that data, right? Because now we've got to recruit that answer from somebody, which doesn't mean, we can do that, but we can't have that in a day's notice, right? There's going to be an entire process in which we would do that, try to honor that as best we could. And that's, I think, one of the things that we want to make sure of is we're opening up a new school that could arguably, that's going to add, we believe, about 350 seats to our total population of elementary seats. You don't want to be in a situation where a month into school we've accessed 100 of those seats because we've not shuffled our responses through to get enough of the movement resolved. And so now you've got a school that's a third full because everybody stayed right where they were. So what's that balance look like? And I think the more parameters, more variables that we put in, the more difficult those exact numbers are to pull.
The last thing I'd like some input on from the district is, since we're not aligning schedules, high school schedules this year, just a recommendation from you guys as far as what the need is to make abrupt changes next year. Maybe it's ninth graders only that are starting, but knowing that there's going to be some credit changes and hopefully some sort of agreement. Just your guys' input. Is it wise to upset the cart?
Yeah, I think, I think that's a really valuable point for us to consider. There's absolutely a necessary reason to move forward on elementary schools. We've got to get that school filled. There's a driving force behind that. Right now we're full at high school and we're over capacity at middle school. So are we shuffling, kids from one school to another? And is there a way that we could maybe phase that in over time and bring in some of those decisions that we've been talking about, whether aligning high school schedules or even the start times conversation that we're working on as well? Maybe we move some of this so that it aligns at the secondary level. I think there's a very real possibility we can give you good feedback and good recommendations on those things.
I would think it's likely that the rules are going to be different for primary and secondary, too. Just because of the nature of it and the way things are going to happen. And at middle school, there's not a lot of room anywhere, right? So it may be difficult to, like you said, you're just moving bodies. And if we're going to look at a fourth middle school, and I think that's a recommendation that's going to come from long range planning. It certainly sounds like that it may make sense to wait on middle school or to wait on middle school and high school until we do those things, and maybe we've ironed out common schedule or those sorts of things as well, or at least had an idea.
Right, and or maybe it's maybe you start ninth graders with the new boundary, the new recommended boundaries, and the rest of it comes over time. And I think there's definitely some value in that conversation because of the nature of the things that we're taking on at this point.
So let's try to set that meeting up next week where we separate those, and maybe we spend some time around primary and some time around secondary, and not blur those conversations too much. And do we want to start with elementary? Yeah, lots of head nods there. Okay. That was just a preview. We did spend a half an hour on a preview. It might be a long workshop next week. Okay. We are moving on. I need my agenda here. So item D is a boundary review update discussion. Dr. Cook, I'm going to let you start this one. I think you had some kind of late information on this come in, do you?
Yeah, so in your board book, we added, I think, 7 or 8 documents and quite a few questions. The questions were mostly topical questions, but the documents themselves were every day we get more and more information from Flow Analytics, and some of this is information that you've either asked for or through conversations have been things that were like, ooh, that'd be a great thing to have. And so I want to make sure that you know that's information that is going to go to the Boundary Review Committee tomorrow night and help them with their discussion. And so on the schedule for tomorrow night at the Boundary Review Committee meeting is to start making some mapping recommendations. And so one of the things that's been kind of recurring, and I think that's why we've got them listed here as 2 separate bullets, is at least an idea of 2 things. One of the topics that has come up quite a bit was, does the Boundary Review Committee have authority to make recommendations that might differ regarding how magnets are currently drawing their student population? That was part of the recommendation that came from the board to the committee regarding Ramsey gets 50% of their student population out of an attendance zone, and the other 50% would come from a prioritized lottery. And then Sorensen receives roughly 50% of their students from an overlay model, and then the remaining students come from outside the overlay. And or whether or not the committee, if there is rationale for why they would opine on either one of those circumstances and how they impact the overall boundaries, first of all, is that in their wheelhouse to do so? And if so, what are the limitations of that? I think, for example, if they came back and said, we recommend 11 schools have hard attendance zones with no choice, I would assume that it's probably not the board's interest to support that. But if they were to say, we would like to recommend that the overlay at Sorensen move 2 blocks this way, is that something, for example? And what is that kind of limit to their authority? Do they have any authority to do that, or do we want to give them guidance, leave that as we gave it to you, and just accept it as is? And then the second question was and this is written in a way that I'm not sure I even agree with the way I've written it, which is the prioritization of the guiding principles. We've got an entire data set from Flow. We've got an entire set of survey results from our community that says these are our priorities. And then you guys have built guiding principles for the committee to do their work. And in many regards, those things don't align. And so the committee said, well, can we get some listing, or can we get some kind of something? And I think one of the things that I would ask you to do, and I'm not sure it's necessarily to write a list of the, I think, 10 or so priorities that are in the guiding principles, write them as priority 1 all the way through 10, but maybe some general feedback on what those are. And maybe it doesn't even need to be a list or even columns of separating, but some general guidance to the committee would probably be well served for them to do their work. And I'm not taking their authority away when I ask for that. What I want to do is empower them so they know what it is that you guys expect. If that helps.
Can I just clarify some of the documents that we got? This is a great one, the socioeconomic status for the current year. It talks about, just so I have terminology correct, it talks about enrollment versus residence. So enrollment is the actual students on that date, October 15th, the free reduced lunch number, et cetera. And then enrollment is just the overall number for that attendance zone.
so that's, you understand that correctly, but I want to make sure we say this correctly, and that is, there's 2 columns on there. One of them is the current free and reduced lunch, and I shouldn't say current, it's current of that date, whatever the date is, October 15th, I believe. On that date, that was the free and reduced lunch count in that building at that moment. The residence count is the percentage of free and reduced lunch for all kids that live in that attendance zone that may or may not attend that school. And so if there's a difference between those two, then that's another meter, if you will, that could show whether kids are going to their attendance zone school, which might be because of forced transfer, it might be because of choice, we don't know. There's no way to know that information, but it does show that if those 2 numbers aren't the same, there are reasons that there's something changing there.
Thank you for providing this, because I think there was some confusion in the committee and the board of what actual number are we looking at, so this really clarified that, so thank you.
How about flow? I know we had a comment today from a committee member about flow and kind of their recommendation about prioritizing guiding principles. And you were going to reach out to Jed, I think, on that. And what feedback did he give you on that?
He said, do not prioritize your guiding principles. Absolutely do not, because you actually wind up tying the hands of your committee. But it is okay to give our committee some guidance with those principles. And but he absolutely said, don't list them numerically.
So let's just talk about maybe that first, guiding principles, because I don't want to confuse the 2 conversations. And, Dr. Cook or maybe Jeff could weigh in here, but the committee asked for this, or in some regards, someone thought it would help the committee to provide some guidance here, because as you said, some of them are at odds with each other, right? If you're they're just opposites. If you're gonna if you're gonna have neighborhood schools, it may be difficult to balance SES. For instance, could be one. That's probably the most obvious ones, or walkability or whatever. So, what were they looking for, or what are we trying to accomplish? Helping them with that, or do we want to let them kind of figure that out amongst the 38 of them? Well, I am kind of asking. I don't know. I'm asking, and no one's looking, so I'm just whoever's going to answer.
I think I'd like to weigh in on this a little bit, and I think so let's just use these 3 examples. Using 95 as a geographic barrier, because it is kind of a challenge. No kid, I don't want, let me say it that way, I don't want a kid walking across 95 to go to their school. So 95 being a geographic barrier to our schools is one that's kind of important. That's number 1. Number 2 is, if we're just going to talk about free and reduced lunch as a measure of resource allocation, then geography means we have some challenges. And if you're going to put a barrier straight down the middle of our district of 95, it means you're going to have some challenges trying to put in a more equitable approach on your free and reduced lunch numbers because of those things. Thirdly, the walkability or neighborhood school concept is also going to challenge those. Fourthly, if you say we want to try to impact the fewest number of kids possible in our schools, if we were to just say we want the number 1 driving force to be equity, because that's what we want to connect it back to the curricular audit, which has been something I've heard quite a bit from folks, is that equity is our number 1 problem now, as stated in the curricular audit. I don't know that equity I'm not trying to poke anybody here, but the curricular audit called out 3 very specific things about equity, and that was opportunity for kids in classes, the discrepancy between our 2 high schools. It talked about forced transfers, and it talked about full-day kindergarten. I'm not saying they wouldn't find something about SES or about how our elementary school distribution is, but they were here. We had that distribution when they were here doing the audit, and that wasn't a finding. So I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm just saying those are the kinds of things that our committee members are looking at and going, okay, that's a lot to consider. Which ones are the most important? And I think when we discussed the springboard, thank you, the springboard number, the one of the intriguing or attractive reasons it was, I think, chosen was the fact that if you looked at the total number of kids that were moved out of their home schools, it was one of the smaller examples. And so I think that's why it was pretty attractive. And so I think now the committee is saying, can we just get some guidance on these priorities? Maybe not a list, but is there a discussion that we can have up here that can help inform their action that Jeff may be able to lean in on, or we can give them that information when they do their work tomorrow?
Yes, good evening. And I think Dr. Cook lined that out very well. And I think, where they don't want to get bogged down and where part of this came from is we know that if you look at this list and you start to make choices in here, some of those we're not going to be able to accomplish those if we're, for example, we may say we're going to change some boundaries to really balance some of the free and reduced lunch counts, but that impacts more people. And so is there a priority or a level of preference that you guys as a board would give to that? Because I think part of the fear is that, they make these changes and bring it to the board, and the board says, nah, that's not what we're looking for. And so I think just the freedom to, talk this out as a committee is part of what they want to hear from you guys. If you guys are so inclined to, give them that authority with that. And, I think one of the ways we can look at this too is, are there thoughts now that you guys have seen the springboard proposal and had a little bit of time with that you would say, well, here are some thoughts I have with that I'd like to see improved from that initial springboard? That's one way we can communicate with the committee through this process as well. And I think also recognizing that there's touch points where we can communicate with you guys as a board as well. So, after we have the open house on the 21st, we do have another board meeting in between. And so an opportunity to say, okay, here's what's happening, and what came out of that open house. And here's what the committee is talking about. And, just to make sure you guys are okay with the process and where we're going with that. But I think part of this stemmed from the fact that they were looking at these, and it'd be really difficult to accomplish everything on this list. And so is there some guidance you can give the committee that will just help them through this process if they get stuck on, some of these as they're battling with some of these hard decisions?
Someone want to take a stab at that first? I will. I think for me, it's kind of looking at that survey data, and we didn't survey everybody, but it was a pretty large sample size. I think it's a pretty good general representation of how at least our parents feel, and that I would kind of use some of that data to guide it, I guess. And to me, the two that I remember kind of standing out were impacting the least amount of kids in neighborhood schools, right? And so those are the two that stand out to me as kind of maybe the bigger concepts, while trying to do as much of this other stuff as we can.
And I think we can maximize proximity to home walkability with neighborhood schools. They seem one and the same to me. And Jeff, back to your concern, I do have concern about Fernand's zone being so long and some of those kids traveling really great distances at the northern. Some kids are basically adjacent to Canfield, and they're traversing half of the district. So I do have concern that does not meet proximity to school. They're passing by 2 elementary schools on their way down. So if we could maybe go horizontal or look to see what that would do to the zone, maybe.
I think as well, just the creation of the feeder system, which goes along with that neighborhood school, so that long term, because earlier we talked about this being for the next 10 years, the feeder system just seems to continually make sense. Those kids travel together, and so to give some good weight to that as they wrestle with all of these.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the feeder's important, and I think that will resolve issues down the road, right? Because it's we don't have that system now, and so you have little pockets of elementary schools that get broken off to a different middle school, and then they maybe get broken back to a different high school, and where we can eliminate that. I think would be great. It'd be a lot easier to do if we had at the fourth middle school, because you could have 3 elementaries feeding each middle school and 2 middle schools feeding each high school, but we could work towards that.
But with that in mind for the future,
right?
Because those are out there and not that far away, hopefully.
I would agree with Chair Morrisroe's comments in that the survey to me is what was a huge part of what the considerations were for the guiding principles. That being said, just because the SES wasn't at the top of that priority list, I think the committee has to consider that. And if you push against the neighborhood and the feeder system with that socioeconomic, then you do that trying to make sure, though, that it doesn't overwhelm it. It would be how I look at it, in that I think the overriding guidance is that we want walkability, we want neighborhood schools, we want a feeder, but we want to balance the SES to the extent that it doesn't override or overwhelm those concepts.
As much as you can balance that. Like you said, sometimes that's difficult because we don't control this. I don't remember who said the housing costs and location and where people can find, what best fits their family. But I would agree with the survey and what everyone said. What Lisa said, a few of these kind of go together. And my hope is that we don't get lost, which seems to have been the case a little bit, on the impact of magnet schools and overlays on the district. I don't want to. I don't want the committee to be deterred on what, just from one kind of perspective as they're looking at it. I like to hear the feedback on it, as we have heard feedback, and we'll be meeting with other schools as well. But I think our focus needs to stay with these guiding principles. So I do agree that they shouldn't be ranked. Yeah, that's very difficult.
I think there were some direct questions, Jeff, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the committee was wondering if that overlay could be manipulated by the committee work. And so I think that's that's an important conversation that we need to have. Yeah. I personally am okay if the committee thinks that they can move it this way or move it up or down, and I think the board made a commitment to evaluate that. I think it was, every 3 to 4 years, and give us some flexibility as that area is gentrified. That could be something that we continually reevaluate, but I think in my opinion, and like everybody else, the committee has some flexibility in manipulating that overlay.
Well, I think that's definitely an advantage of an overlay too, is that it gives the opportunity to manipulate that as opposed to a zone. Changing a zone is very difficult as opposed to an overlay.
And so you're kind of moving on to question 2 there, part 2 there, more on the magnet school enrollment criteria. We picked whatever it was, Springboard 9 or 19, whatever it was.
Well, the magnet's in there on the top.
Right.
Too. Yeah.
Okay, you're right. Are we clear on the prioritization of the guiding principles, and did we give you enough that makes sense for your work of your committee that you can report back on that?
I think so. I think what we'll likely do is we're going to hope that Scott's back there paying attention to what each one of you said, and collect that and hand that to the committee members probably tomorrow, and spend 10 minutes or less, I hope, because they really need some time to roll up their sleeves and get working on that. And I think we're good with that. I think it's going to help them clarify what it is that you guys are seeking, because this is a challenge, right? And I think that there's going to be as equal interest in the conversation I think we're about to have, which is, what's their, if they were to come back with some recommendations on the magnet starting points that you guys gave them as recommendations, if they were to recommend something like that, would you say, whoa, that's not yours, or is that something that this board wants to give some guidance on?
Yes, let's, just so we're on the same page, let's kind of remember what we did a couple of weeks ago. So we picked, I think it was Springboard 9, with kind of a starting point where Ramsey had 50% of their seats coming from an attendance zone and Sorensen had 50% of their seats coming from an overlay. And I think the way I've heard it from Dr. Cook and from Mr. Voller is that set in stone? Or even from committee people, is that like, no, those are givens. We set those and that's what it is? Or are we willing to accept feedback, and maybe what are the bounds of that feedback with attendance zone versus overlay? I assume we want it to be one or the other for a portion. And what portion? Are we set at 50% and it's 50%? Or are we willing to accept variation on the recommendation there? So could it go higher? Could it go a little lower? I'm assuming it couldn't be 0 and it couldn't be 100, because we would have done those if those were options. So I think that's what we're looking to give to the committees. Can they have some play in the placement of those? So it's kind of the three questions: overlay versus attendance, the percentage, and the location. To me, the location was just kind of a given to some degree. I just assumed they were going to play with location because that's what they're doing. They're locating the boundaries.
One clarification, Dr. Cook, and I think there was a question about it last week, is about the busing, and maybe you could enlighten me so I can weigh in on this conversation. But do we anticipate providing busing for any of the, besides the 50% of Ramsey that is attendance zone there, or the overlay for Sorensen? I do have a little bit of concern if 50% of a large school is lottery and we don't provide any busing. Does that increased likelihood that those that can will go? So I wanted to hear your input, and if you got any plans.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question, in that in a magnet school, if you don't bus to that magnet school, then that changes, that's going to impact the population, because that means there are certain students, if they live more than 1.5 miles away, that are not going to get access because they're not going to have a mechanism to attend there. And so that's historically, I think, has been 50% has been, at least for the elite, at least immediate kind of history, has been that kind of breakover number for both of our magnet schools. About 50%, give or take 5% in a year, has been coming from outside of an attendance zone, and they're getting transported in some fashion. I think you have to balance that. I think it's really important to recognize that if you're going to a magnet school, the reason a magnet school exists is because it's providing programming that is attracting people to the programming. And so you want to balance the opportunity for people that want that programming to go get that programming, which could include this access without transportation. But that's going to have an impact on SES likely, because people, not everybody, but people that aren't going to be able to get their kids there are not going to choose that. And in larger communities, oftentimes there's public transit service that could support that. We don't have that option here. So we could potentially look at increasing bus services. It's going to get expensive before we wind up in a position where, and then if you're busing to magnets, then are you going to be busing to other people that are choosing? Right now we're busing for forced transfers because we're the persons that have done that to them, and so it's kind of our obligation. And so every one of those decisions comes at a cost. Right now there's one bus that buses to Sorensen, and it's busing over from by the Fort grounds, which is that's the Sorensen overlay is pretty small, so there's not much of the overlay that is outside of the 1.5 mile radius. And that's really actually the busing there is more about safety busing than it is about the distance. That still fits within the distance, so it's kind of a trade-off in that regard. But Ramsey Because of the size of the Ramsey zone currently, there's quite a few buses that go there. So.
I think that was a concern for me, considering that they are different animals, and Sorensen is much more urban. We know how many schools we have within a very small radius, and so many of those kids can walk even if their parents don't have transportation. I think Ramsey is different, and I would ask that maybe the committee give it some consideration if they think busing could be an impediment to students choicing into that school. It's a big question, but I think it's something we should consider, considering the number of students it would affect.
I do want to ask for clarification on one thing. If the committee, for whatever reason, would recommend a mixed model in which an attendance zone and an overlay existed at one or the other, is that something that is, and I'm not suggesting that that's the right answer. I'm just, it's, right now there's a 50% attendance zone recommendation starting point for Ramsey, and there is a 50% overlay. If one or both of those were recommended to be changed, is that something that the board would be nervous about, for example?
Well, I think when we were doing our discussion, and maybe I'm mixing it up, but they are two different schools, and I believe that's why we went with the 50% of the overlay in Sorensen and the 50% at Ramsey, because they're, if you look at them on the map and you look at their, you know, how it sits right now, we have to look at them differently. In my opinion, I'm one, but we also have kids that choice into other schools, so it's not just a magnet school issue. We have people that choice, you know, to Hayden Meadows, to Atlas to Skyway, and that's the same thing where choice, you know, when people can drive their kids to, we have open enrollment to whatever school they choose, it kind of makes it difficult. It's not just a magnet school issue. That's what I want to get at. It seems to be highlighted for magnet schools, but it's not just a magnet school issue, the choicing that takes place.
This is great. We talked about that.
Yes.
To address Dr. Cook's question, I would not be opposed to the idea of an attendance zone and an overlay if that's where the committee felt these principles were being best served. I also, in answering sort of the three things that Casey talked about, I mean, if the committee felt that attendance zones versus an overlay were more appropriate in meeting these principles, I am not in any way going to be offended or feel that there's some kind of turf here. This was 100% the starting concept, and to the extent that the committee, in trying to meet those guiding principles, feels that that starter is not the most effective or best way to do it, then I would want to hear that.
How about the percentages?
I'm equally open to the percentages.
Yeah, I'm open as well.
I didn't
To
hear what you-
100%?
You're okay.
I mean, I think I'd like to give that guidance and make sure. So what if they came back and they said every school should have 100% attendance on, including the magnets?
Well, I would struggle with that because I think we as a board, but I will speak for myself, have always felt that charter, or that the magnets and the school of choice concept is important for our district. So I would not want to see that extinguished.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to echo that. I'm not comfortable with coming back and saying 100%. I think we need to look at the good things again that are working, and a 50%-ish is working well for those schools as far as programmatically doing well and those types of things. So I'm not comfortable with 100%. No.
I agree. I'm not comfortable with 100% either.
Okay. And I think we landed on 50% because that's kind of where those schools were operating currently. They're pulling about 50% from their current overlays. So some adjustment with that percentage, possibly, but we're not going a whole lot higher. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I don't know that it needs a hard number to it, just some, that it sounds to me like you're pretty open to the idea of attendance zone overlay. Generally pretty happy with the number, but would have some flexibility either direction on the number if there's valid reasons as to why it was modified, but let's not lose the intent of the reason that we are calling them magnets. Like, a magnet school is in place to draw students and families in for programming. And if you put a 90% attendance zone or overlay on Sorensen, that means 30 families in the entire rest of the district could compete for those last out of 300 positions, 30 positions. And so I think that's eventually this becomes hard math, and it's just what number of positions do you get. But I think our committee would be much happier with this information, just knowing where it is that they can lean in.
Okay, so you got what you needed there?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Your eyes got real big.
No, I appreciate,
Made me
I was
nervous for a
taking
second.
notes. No, I appreciate the feedback, and I think that does help guide the committee's work. And I think one of the takeaways I hear is that we do have some flexibility for the committee to have some discussions about it. And I think it's important for us to also challenge the committee to explain why they are coming to some of their decisions.
Jeff, could you pass on a message for us?
Yes.
That we're very grateful for their commitment to serve. This is a difficult committee to be on, and they are bearing the weight and the burden for everybody. And so I'm very appreciative of their efforts.
I will pass it on. Thank you.
We can bring cookies or something to make it easier.
I think one thing we should all keep in mind, and I know we had this discussion when we kind of set the 50% attendance zone at Ramsey. We didn't have a lot of parent engagement at Ramsey, and we kind of took a stab at that one a little bit. And for me, it's just because of the magnitude, the size of Ramsey. I felt like we needed the predictability of an attendance zone, that the overlay is just a little wishy-washy when you have 750 kids. So that's kind of why I supported an attendance zone there. And at Sorensen with 300, 350, it's more manageable, the overlay. But we said at that meeting, we might have this completely wrong, and we could go into the January 21st feedback session and, have Ramsey people come and say, well, what? That's not what we wanted. And, I think we recognize that at that point, and I think we need to continue to recognize that, and we need the attendance zone folks to recognize that we may get it wrong, and that's the whole point of doing these feedback sessions as we move along, is so we reflect the values of our community, and that we take their input and we adjust these things. So we didn't get it right when we selected, Springboard option 9, and I'm pretty certain they're not going to get it right with whatever they propose on the 21st. So let's just keep that in mind and know it's a process, and we'll get there, and hopefully we'll get the best product we can get by going through the process.
Yes, we're at the very start of the process. So I echo Lisa in thanking every community member that's serving on these committees. We should provide some snacks, because there are multiple committee members that serve on multiple committees in our district. And we are grateful for all that they do. But this is a process, and we know that people aren't going to be happy in the end, and that is very difficult. Nobody wants to sit up here and make people unhappy. That's not why any of us got on the school board. I know I can speak for all of us on that. We're not in the business of making people unhappy. We're in the business of doing what we can when we can, and always keeping what's best for kids at the forefront. So thank you for those that serve right along with us. We couldn't do it without you.
Okay. I think if we got what you needed, let's move on.
I feel like we're good. I feel like we've got a lot of guidance on this. So thank you.
Okay, so moving on puts us to, what does that put us to?
E,
which is district work plan update.
All right, so now that all the easy stuff is done, we can have Seth come talk a little bit about the major updates we've got for the work plan as we start to move into the time where this is going to start moving pretty quick. And you guys we're gonna be pushing a lot of documentation and a lot of work at you. At this point, I'm gonna have Seth do an update on the school start times committee work. It's been going well, and I just want to give him a shout out. He's been doing a great job with this committee. This is another one of those that is a just challenging concept, and it's likely to be a difficult conversation the entire time it goes, because it is such a powerful topic. So, Seth.
Thanks, appreciate it. I feel like I know what our CEA president feels like now. The room clears when you walk to the podium. It's perfect. Thank you for having me. It's been almost a month since we met. Our last meeting was on December 5th here in this room. We covered a couple things that I'll go over really quickly. We do have a meeting coming up on January 15th. And so at that meeting, our plan is to review our meeting from the 5th, where we heard from a lot of different experts. And I'll go over that more in just a second. So we reviewed some data from them. We heard from a bunch of different experts in different areas. Our meeting on the 15th, we're going to synthesize some of that information and then hopefully begin a draft recommendation. And so we'll go through a process to kind of build some consensus around a possible recommendation, and also maybe a minority recommendation to all of you. Their homework over break was to work on some survey questions for our community. So we'll be putting all of that together at that meeting on the 15th, and that'll hopefully go out shortly thereafter with a closing date before our meeting in February, so we can start reviewing that data and really kind of refine our draft recommendations based on that.
Seth, real quick, you might want to send out a reminder of that homework.
Yeah, I've been in touch with a few of the chairs of the small groups. So, yeah, their due date was not till this Friday, so I was gonna send them a reminder of that. One thing we reviewed at our last meeting was this table that I thought was helpful for the committee to take a look at, and it was just kind of looking at the why, what, when, where, how. And so you can see here, the why is the research on later start times and what that does for students. There's a lot around sleep science. The what is really what this committee is looking at, and that's the impacts that this change would have on the community and our programs. The when is to be decided, right? There's so many decisions being made right now, one of which you just spent a lot of time discussing. And so I think that'll be up to where this kind of slots in with all the other work that's happening. And then the how is really, how do we implement that change and mitigate some of the impacts that this committee is looking at? So that'll be part of their recommendation to you is, here's what they found in their study. Here's some of the major impacts that we think need to be considered as we move forward on this. As far as experts go, how this worked was we split into small groups. The small groups talked about what data they needed, what information they needed, what experts they needed to talk to, and then I invited those folks in to that meeting. And so we had pretty good representation both from our district and the community, and so you can see a list of those folks up there, and that's also in your packet as well. There was 5 or 6 experts. At our meeting next week, we'll talk about whether there's any of those experts they'd like to invite back or any additional information they need as well. I would guess that maybe like Jill Hill and Jamie Lenz, those were 2 that I heard a lot of the groups talking about, provided really good information, and they would maybe need to hear from them again. So, and that's really it. That's my update on that December 5th meeting, and kind of a preview of our next meeting.
I thought a quick question. I know initially you'd presented like a couple different options. Maybe was it 4 different possibilities for timing? Is the committee using that kind of as their base, and then they can come up with their own model, synthesize it, agree on it, and then bring it? So it might not be one of those exact.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So to borrow language from the boundary review process, that was a springboard, and I think as we planned that meeting, we just felt that it was much easier when you had a concrete example in front of you. Then you could kind of start to visualize okay, if we flip elementary and secondary start times, that's going to have a bigger impact than if we just do a small change of moving times a half an hour back. So that's kind of the language we've been using. But I have tried to make it really clear it's a springboard just to get conversation going. So,
Seth, what's the feedback been on the timeline? It seems super aggressive, right?
it's definitely pretty compressed. I think one thing that we've talked about as a committee is that might be part of our recommendation is to ask for more time. And so we put that on the table at the first meeting. We'll see how the discussion goes at the next couple of meetings as we're drafting a recommendation. But that might be part of it, is that we request more time to really review the impacts a little bit more before we can make a final recommendation. I feel like after this next meeting, I'll have a better understanding of the temperature of the committee and kind of which way they're leaning. We're going to go through a few different iterations of some consensus building to try and figure out, where we need to go. So,
any thought on, when you talk to experts, and maybe it's at our level, at administration level, or maybe at the committee level, but leaning on someone who's gone through the process, regionally, and just saying, hey, can you give us some feedback and how to work for you? And well, geez, if we had to do it all over again, we would have done this instead of this, or just so we're not reinventing the wheel. I guess if we are making changes, we're not making changes, or
so you might notice some of the experts there. One was from Idaho Falls, which is a school district that's undergone this change. So I've contacted them a couple different times. Seattle School District as well has a ton of information on their website. So I've kind of been using some of that as we go through the process. They have all their committee meetings and minutes and agendas on there. So we've been using that as well.
What was their timeline like? Just curious.
Seattle, I believe, took 2 years to do it. Some of that, though, was they spent quite a bit of time debating the research, which we've not done as much of. And so I think their whole first year was really just digging into the research itself. The second year, I think, was more based around the logistics. So.
Okay. Any other questions for Seth? All right. Well, thank you. Before we move on to integrated math here, just because we're talking district work plan, just a friendly reminder, I think it's the 27th, January 27th. Is that right, Dr. Cottle? We have another workshop scheduled, and that one's to talk about common bell schedules at our 2 high schools. So we had a lot of information on that last month, and I think that was kind of our homework, is to look at all that information. So just a reminder for us and for public, and that's at 5 p.m. here. Okay. All right.
Good evening, Superintendent Cook, Chair Morris Rowe, and trustees. I am here to talk about the Secondary Math Academy and just give an update of the work we've been doing together. So our last meeting was on December 18th. We met together to look at combining standards, providing focus, to make sure that they provide focus, to make sure they're measurable and that they're specific, especially in the 3 C's that we've been working on really hard, which are cognitive depth, context, and content. And as I mentioned before, we've been using the building metaphor all the way through. And it might seem sort of like slow going, but it's very similar to where you lay the foundation and you don't see the building coming up yet. But once you do, once you have that solid foundation, then the walls and everything else seem to come up rather quickly. But we're making sure that everything is solid in terms of our objectives as we begin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story of Austin's Butterfly, but it's the story of a first grader from Boise, Idaho, and he was tasked with drawing a butterfly. And his first effort was what you see in the upper left-hand corner. And his peers gave him some feedback. And so he came back with that second effort. And then his peers gave him some more feedback, and he came back with that third effort. And they said, "Oh, Austin, you got too round." And so he came back with that fourth butterfly, and they said, "Ooh, Austin, you're doing great. Now you're ready to fill in the middle." So he did. And they were like, "Oh, Austin." And so then they said, "Now you can add some color." And he did. And that's what his butterfly, this first grader's butterfly, ended up looking like. And it's a story as much about the power of feedback as it is about the power of multiple iterations and drafts. And so I shared this with our teachers at the beginning of our day when we met on December 18th to talk about the importance of multiple iterations, the importance of giving each other really great feedback, and the importance of commitment and perseverance in this really difficult work. So we revised as partners. We gave each other feedback. They worked with either in partners or in triads to give feedback to one another, to somebody near their grade level so they could look at the standards vertically. And then once they were done giving each other some feedback and some time to revise, they started to think about creating scope and sequence. So our next meeting will be January 29th, and our topic on that day will be, we'll start to look at assessment. What questions might I answer for you about integrated math? Or not just integrated math, pardon me, secondary math.
Any questions? Would it be possible going forward to, as a non-educator that I am, or I'm not, I guess, depending how you look at it, they're tough concepts to visualize for me. I want to be visual with it to some degree of maybe, hey, this is how the standard was written previously, and the work we've done, this is how it's changed. Just not the whole pacing guide, but just one example, just so we can kind of see, okay, this is what the work is. It's foundational, right? So you don't see the building rising. Yet. So it's the picture of the before and after, I guess, of, well, it was just flat dirt, and now you've got this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you'd like to see some samples of what they've been doing.
Yeah, not a bunch of work for you to do, I hope, but
no,
just one here or there would just help me, I guess.
Absolutely. And would you like to see that in our next, just to clarify, would you like to see that at the next board meeting or in a board memo?
Well, first, is that valuable? Does anyone else find value in that? Okay. Yeah, I think in a board meeting, because I think for our community, that's an important piece to see. Like, what are they doing? What's going on?
I'd be excited to share that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. You get to stay there, it looks like.
I do. My second update is on Form 2100, Form 1 and 2100, Form 2. And these are the course guides and the course proposal form that I am suggesting for updates. So to go back to the curriculum audit, finding 2.3 said that the curriculum guides for K-12 core and non-core content areas are inadequate in quality to direct teaching and learning to ensure alignment of the written, taught, and tested curriculum. So part of the work that we've been embarking on is to provide better templates for guides. And so in order to do that, we looked at what are the quality characteristics defined by the audit. The audit suggests these 5 criteria: that we provide clarity and specificity of objectives, that there's congruity of the curriculum to the assessment process, that there's delineation of the prerequisites, essential skills, knowledge, and attitudes, that there's delineation of the major instructional tools, and that there's clear approaches for classroom use. But of course, we wanted to make sure that this met the standard of Coeur d'Alene School District, not just the audit, that it fits who we are as a district and our mission and vision. So you'll see that the new form just reflects the newer process and updates some of the wording, and then it requests that a curriculum guide be created prior to the adoption of the course or moving forward in the course. And then in the current versus the new Form 2, you can see that there are many, many differences. If you've looked at the new form, it's much more in-depth than we've had in the past. And that was reflected through some conversations with teachers, with administrators, with auditors, with district administrators, to talk through what kinds of changes we'd like to see in those. So I don't know if you have any questions regarding those forms.
Not necessarily a question on the form. I think on the first page is talking about the timeline for it. I know initially when we were talking about creating math curriculum or a secondary math program, that is obviously a bigger process than just a course. But in many of those conversations, I remember that oftentimes maybe the curriculum would be tested for a year, and then during the summer it would be revised, and so the first year was like the trial year, and then I think it was that cool.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yep.
the
And so-
cycle. Mhm.
yes, thank you. And so I'm wondering with this, I don't see if there's any kind of reevaluation of a new course that's been approved. Is that something you think we need, or is this really just for like your new English course that you're offering? Or
So the primary purpose I would see where this course or the new course proposal form would be used would be for something that doesn't meet. It's more of an elective. It's not going to be, your core courses, your core math, your core English, your core science, your core social studies. It's going to be those courses that people want to offer that don't necessarily fit into that cycle neatly. And I think there absolutely is a need to evaluate and look at all courses and reevaluate and readjust over time. But the purpose of that form is more for those sort of those one-offs.
I guess the reason I asked is after the audit, we recognized that we were offering a whole lot of courses. And so I just wondered if it's something that maybe we could, add in, that a new course would be evaluated in a timely fashion, or just so we're ensuring that our new courses actually are working and they're effective and they're covering the standards that we're hoping they will.
Okay. And would you like to see that written directly onto that form just to?
No, I just wanted to get your input on it, just to ensure that if it's a new course, we know it's working, I guess, however you think that would work in best.
Yeah, I think that's a really important consideration, and that we have written actually into our board policy too, that we're going to evaluate courses over time. So those need to fit into those cycle.
Other questions, comments?
I'll just echo what Trustee May said. I like the idea of having that opportunity for evaluation after some period of time. And also just great work. That had to have taken a long time. I was reading that thinking, wow. So just kudos to you, Katie.
Thank you very much.
Katie, I was wondering, how long do you anticipate it'll take to change everything over onto your new form? I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's an arduous task.
My hope, I don't know, is the easy answer. My hope is that with the four main courses, the four main core courses of science, math, English, and social studies, that we would be able to do that in about 4 years. Yes. But to get every single course onto that new form it will take time because it's definitely, as you can see, it's rigorous, it's thorough, and it takes time to develop curriculum that is of that nature.
It's taken a year for math. 4 years. Just echo what they said. I know there was a lot of work in this, and so I really appreciate what you've been able to do here and the resources you've pulled in, and I think it'll lead to a better product for us and a more consistent product, and just a layout and easier understanding for staff and for parents and for students, kind of what is this class about and what is expected, and what am I going to learn, or what am I going to teach, and what's the resource, and all those sorts of things. So I just really appreciate the work you've put into it and the time that you were able to do it.
Thank you.
Because you've got lots of other things going on too. So thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to get to work on this.
Oh, and I appreciate the timeline. You drew the hard line in the sand. I hope we can abide by that. You know, I know we get a lot of teachers, I forgot to get this in this month, but there's kind of checks and balances and steps along the way. So hopefully that'll alleviate some of those kind of late.
And just to clarify, my hope is that that timeline can come into place for the next school year, since we didn't have that available for this school year. I know there are some courses that kind of got caught in the squeeze. And so we want to try to make sure that we can honor that.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, moving on, facilities update. I was kind of surprised to drive down Prairie over break, and it's like, whoa, school's gone vertical. Besides the gym.
Yes, good evening again. Yeah, it is really cool to see it, isn't it? So, and I've got a few pictures here that I can show you, kind of some up-close details of what we're doing with that. So, to start my update, I just want to let you know that Lakes is virtually complete. So we're happy to have that one nearly behind us. There's a little bit of punch list that we have left to do, and a few items that we're still kind of working on wrapping up, but just a couple of items for that. So if you guys we'd be happy to set up a tour of that facility here in the near future, so you can come see what we've done with that. And I'll work on some pictures for the next board meeting of kind of where we started and where we finished with that, to show you guys what we did with that project.
Before you move on to Nexa, do you have an idea, kind of budget-wise, how it's looking, and more change orders? And I know we had a few surprises, I think, pop up in there. But how are we looking there?
Yeah, I mean, budget-wise, we're going to be right there, like almost to the dollar of what we budgeted for it. Including the contingency, we've used most of that. There were a lot of change orders that we went through with this. I think we were in the 60s in terms of number of change orders that we even considered with that. And some of those were just little things. We ran into a lot of stuff because this was a remodel of an old building. And so there were a lot of little, just kind of $1,000 type change orders of, we need to, this switching isn't working out right.
And I just want to remind, actually, this might even be new information for 2 board members, that we ran that one on a CMGC contract. Remember? And so I think one of the things, and Jeff and I haven't even had a chance to talk about this, but it might be good for us to kind of go back and evaluate that from a lens of system performance, that decision making versus a different model. And so now that it's come in at budget, we did have some issues with that contingency, had to mitigate, and a couple of other things. We spent a lot of time talking about that model, if you recall, about a year ago. So I think it's probably a good conversation for us to come back to and look at that. And we can do that and then present that to you guys in some form of a memo.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out in that model is the owner does carry a little bit more of the onus when it comes to change orders in that type of a model. The builder doesn't carry quite as much contingency going into that as you do in a traditional design bid build model. And so, as we looked at a lot of the change orders of, a little thing like, for example, of painting the floor in the locker rooms. We got into the remodel of the locker rooms, and we had these beautiful locker rooms, and these really chipped up floors. And so then it came to, the decision of, do we repaint those floors to, make it match the rest of the remodel that we did in there, and, some certain things like that then come to the owner for consideration of it. And so, there were things like that we said, you can't have this brand new locker room with 30-year-old floors that are just completely chipped and, look like you should have done something in there. So, there are things like that were added in there. I think the biggest surprise was the cooler. We'd intended to go in, take the cooler out, and we were going to rebuild it in its new location. But as we pulled it apart, it was full of mold and just from the outside, and it was just kind of disintegrating. And so we got into it and realized it was beyond repair. And so I think that was about a $50,000 cost to us. So that was the biggest surprise that we had with that. And then also part of that contingency we did use towards the alternates as well. So, I don't have all the final numbers yet, but I'm guessing it's going to be almost to the dollar of what we budgeted for that project. So I'll give you guys some updates as we get kind of the final numbers, and there's a couple change orders that we're still pricing out right now.
Can you refresh our memory? I can't remember. Wasn't there a couple contingencies that we were waiting to see, like the band maybe, or sound system, or weren't there a couple that we were still kind of deciding?
No, we accepted all of the change
them?
orders. Yep.
No, contingencies.
Sorry, the contingency items. Yes, we accepted all of the
fantastic.
contingency items. I think there were 7 on the list, and we did accept all of them. So you guys made that decision at a board meeting several months back. So
I think some didn't we end up doing outside the contract, like the sound, didn't?
Yes,
we did that.
Yeah. We ultimately got a better price by doing the sound system, outside of the original price. But yes, that is correct. You look, I have a question.
Well, at least was it like backboards, or there was we did them all.
We did do them all. Yes, the backboards are the one thing that are not complete because we ran into a problem with them fitting, and we had to have there's some things at the fabricators right now. So that's kind of the one item that is hanging out there. But it'll once those the metal is fabricated for those, that'll be a 2-hour project to finish swapping those out. So. Mm-hmm. And they finished a bunch of stuff over the break. So I have a meeting there tomorrow, so I'll get final details on how much of the punch list and final things we did. But I know we're very, very close to being done on that project. So the Nexa Prairie School is coming along. Like you mentioned, as you drive down Prairie Avenue right now and look over, you start to see some really massive structure going up. So it's fun to see that coming out of the ground. We're starting to see big progress. So here you see the gym, and the foreground, they're forming the stage, the support for the stage, the concrete forms there. Again, just another look of that. So to the right of that will be the commons area for the lunchroom. And then here you can start to see a lot of the steel being assembled. So they've got cranes in there, they've got the scissor lifts, and they've got welding torches all over the place assembling that. And I think I have a better picture, but you start to see some of the floor trusses go in as well on this. And actually going back to the gym, they did get the roof put on the gym as well. So the roof deck is on, and I think this week they're decking, or they're putting the final roof on. So we'll have one complete dry space in there so they can store materials and things in the gym and have that area dried. So you can, again, in the background, you see the crane lifting the big steel into place. And so this is primarily a steel building. Then they'll come in and they'll metal frame in between there. And then the tent that you see on the very left-hand side of the picture, they're doing masonry under there. So we've got masonry in about kind of 4 different main sections plus the gym of this, and then it's infilled with the steel frame.
What's the exterior in the steel framed areas?
It's like a corrugated metal type siding. And then here you can see the second floor trusses that are being assembled in there. So you can see where it continues up, that'll be going into the second floor. And so what they do from here is then they put a pan deck on top of those trusses, and then they actually lay a concrete floor right on top of that. So that's kind of where they're going over the next couple weeks, is finishing the assembly of this shell. And then kind of the next major benchmark is once we get that concrete poured in the second floor, and then you'll start to see the roof come in and get the building dried in. So we're probably about a month and a half from being dried in on this, and they're continuing to make progress and move along with it. So it's good to see that vertical visual process now as you drive by and see it popping up. And the other thing on my list to talk about tonight, and we really actually talked a lot about this, is zoning. But I think I will take the opportunity to just kind of remind a couple things of what we're doing in the process that we haven't fully probably given the attention to that we need to yet tonight. So the committee meetings, we meet again tomorrow night from 6 to 8 right here. And then we meet again the following Tuesday from 6 to 8. And those are both what we're going to call mapping workshops. And so that's where we really start to roll up our sleeves. We're going to work in small groups and take the springboard and start to dig into it and say, okay, what is it going to look like? And these small groups are going to basically take their pens and start to mark things up and give it to the flow team and say, okay, what does it look like if we change certain boundaries? Like what, if we, I think I heard Ms. May say, what would it look like if we go a little bit more kind of east-west rather than north-south linear? What would that look like? So if they consider that and kind of start to draw out some boundaries that consider that, what would that do? And then in your board packet today, you guys had kind of the SES statistics that result from that and how many students are impacted by those changes. And they'll go kind of real time. They've got another mapping expert that's coming with them tomorrow as well. So, they will take that from the small groups, make those changes real time and give them a summary of what those maps look like. And, and so they'll start to work it up and make changes and see where we go with that. So that's the next two meetings. And then that leads us to taking a proposal that is kind of the next step from the springboard that we'll present at the community open house on the 21st. So January 21st at Coeur d'Alene High School from 6 to 8.
Jeff, I was curious about the process that you guys have for consensus building. So you break into your small groups, and how do you guys all get on the same page? I'm sure Flo has some sort of...
Yeah, so as they work in their small groups, if a small group is feeling really good about where they're going with something, at the end of the meeting, we have some time built in where they want to bring a proposal forward, and that small group will say, hey, here are our thoughts, here's what we were thinking. And what do you guys as a group think about this? And we'll use the mechanism of fingers or thumbs, kind of like, yeah, I'm on board with that. I really like that. I might be on board with that with kind of a thumb to the side, but talk me through. I've got a few questions with that, or, I'm really not okay with it. Or I think it's this one that's like, I'm blocking this, like I am really not in favor of this. And so, we use that in CAPS as well. So, as a mechanism for building consensus and working through things. And so that's kind of a very similar model we use with this to help build that
And
consensus.
do they try, once they get consensus on one area, then they say, okay, we're not touching it again, or we're hoping that we can move on to the next area, and then they build consensus there? Is it?
Yeah, that is a little bit I kind of have that same question, right? Like, where are we going to go with that? I mean, are we looking at this as a consensus over the entire thing, or, are we looking at this in stages? And, I think we'll probably look at it ultimately probably with primary and secondary separately, and then bring them together. And, where do we go with that? And then, so maybe we're really close with something, but another group has some ideas to improve it. And, so maybe then the next workshop, we were starting with a new place because we came to relative consensus with a starting point for the next mapping workshop. And, and then that'll get us to a point where we'll take another model to the public that we'll show at that meeting on the 21st. Any other questions I can answer?
Okay,
Right,
thank you. All right. Assessment data. Good evening, Dr. Nelson.
Good evening, Chair Morrisroe. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I am pleased to be able to present to you tonight. As you had heard from the Lake City ASB officers, we have received our PSAT results. They came in about 2 weeks before the winter break. So our buildings are now starting to go through them and start sharing those results with our students, who of course need to know as they prepare. Just as a quick reminder, this is a preliminary SAT. That's what the P stands for. It's intended to give us an opportunity to be able to watch how students are growing, with the ultimate goal that they are totally prepared to take that SAT exam in the spring of their junior year. So everything that we see really is measuring only 6 weeks of instruction, but it also takes a look vertically at how we're performing as a system, and we can look back at these along the way. I'd also like to remind you and our public as well that all of our results are posted at our district website. When you get to cdaschools.org, you just click on Departments, Assessments, and then you'll find these under the College and Career Preparedness area. So let's.
Dr. Nelson, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
6 Nelson, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
6 weeks of instruction, because they took it 6 weeks into the year?
Correct. This exam is taken second week of October. So you're looking about 6 weeks of instruction when we have this assessment.
Right, but essentially it was 12 months since they took it last, if they were a
Correct.
sophomore or a junior, right? So
Correct.
Isn't it kind of measuring what they learned from point A to point B in the
Certainly
12 months,
not
right?
turning that part away, no. It is just taken at that time of the year. But absolutely, if you look at kind of our lineage of what we do, grades, grade 9 takes the PSAT 8-9, and that's a measure of grade 8-9 standards. Our students in grades 11, 10, and 11 are taking the NMSQT, which stands for the National Merit Student Qualifying Test, which measures standards in grade bands 9, 10, and 11 and 12. So yes, it does measure not only what students have known, but it gives us a trajectory as well. The exam comes in two different sections. They're called evidence-based reading and writing and mathematics. And you can see the timing based on what's here on the screen. It's about a 3.5-hour assessment. A lot of that comes from bubbling and demographics and all of those fun things that everybody remembers when you take these assessments. But you can see some of those content and covered skills. We drill down into academic vocabulary. We drill down into grammar. We drill down into specific topics of mathematics like geometry, trigonometry, pre-calculus as we go through. But it is a one-shot assessment. There is no makeup date, unfortunately, for this. And so in our grades 8-9 assessment, the grade 9 assessment, we had around 90% of all students taking it that time. Let's dive into our PSAT 8-9 results. If you take a look at the results along the screen, you'll notice there's a comparison between 2018 and 2019. For the most part, we're fairly flat if you compare those non-cohort years. So those two different groups of students who took the assessment in 2018 and 2019. We're remaining right at the 59th percentile nationally, so better than normal, we could say, along the way. But we didn't really see a lot of increase along the way. So both cohorts, you could say, are similar at that particular time of year. One of the nice things that we will talk about with this assessment, however, is that all students receive their exact answer booklet and all students receive back their scores. So each student will be able to go back and say, well, I can see that I missed question number 5, and they can drill down into whether that was easy, medium, or difficult, and they'll actually get some assistance to find out why they chose that. And if they chose answer D and answer D was incorrect, they can actually see why that was an incorrect response. But for the most part, looking at this set of results, not much change from those 2 years. In mathematics, we do see some change. We see a cohort growth, a non-cohort growth from 440 to 447 over 2 years. And the areas in which we saw improvement for our grade 9 students are in the areas of science and in problem solving and data analysis over the previous years. You'll see a slight tick up in each of those areas. Now in mathematics, we have moved up to the 65th percentile, so a good level of growth as well to point out. One of the things, however, with any PSAT, and the SAT does this as well, that's important to look at is whether our students are meeting benchmarks. The College Board has established a score by which they believe that students are prepared for college and career coursework that would be preparatory of what they would see at the college. They have backward mapped that all the way down to grades 8 and 9. And so what you see on the screen here is the percentage of students who have met that benchmark initially at grade 9. At Coeur d'Alene High School, not much growth there. We did see a little bit of tick up at Lake City High School, up 4% over the previous year. And we saw that 6% of our students at Venture High School in grade 9 met that benchmark. Always great to see. Overall, as a district, though, only up 3% in students meeting that benchmark.
Mike, a quick question before we go on. I was curious on the 65th percentile, it says 7-point increase. Is that math or just everything,
That was just mathematics.
just math? So the 65th percentile for our raw
Correct.
math. Okay.
59th percentile in English language are evidence-based learning, evidence-based reading and writing, too many acronyms, and 65th percentile for math.
So it's hard to wrap your mind around it because then it says that we only have 31% of Lake City at benchmark for math, and then we have 47, but we're in the 65th percentile. I'm guessing maybe the national.
It's based on national norms,
Right. Yeah.
and I'd be more than glad to provide that table
Oh
to you.
no, I
if
was
you'd
just
like to
yeah,
see.
it's interesting, isn't it?
Mhm.
So our country's probably not at benchmark either.
Nationally, there is a struggle in math.
Yeah.
But that's at meeting at both benchmarks, right? That data point on that screen there. So those are what percentage?
This is
met
both, correct.
And so you may have
previous-
students that meet the math but don't meet the
Correct.
the English-based portion, or vice versa.
And we do have it broken out. If you would like me to provide that in board memo, I can certainly break it down for you. And actually, it is in the summary sheet of the PSAT 8-9. It's on the back page. So now let's talk about those assessments that students will take over 2 years, and that's the NMSQT, taken in grades 10 and 11. A few more students took this assessment. Over 90% of the students took it on that particular day. And again, this is measuring grade level standards in the 10-11, or 9-10 and 11-12 grade level bands. It's important when we take a look at students taking multiple years of assessment that we look at it by cohort. And what I'd like to do is kind of break that down here for you. So I'm going to open up my little laser pointer. So what you'll notice here is the scale score at grade 10 for Coeur d'Alene High School, grade 11 Coeur d'Alene High School, 10, 11 at Lake City High School, 10 and 11 for Venture High School. It's important to not only know that, yes, we did see a non-cohort drop. For whatever reason, these students in grade 10 did not perform well this year in evidence-based reading and writing. But what we'd prefer to do is take a step back and look at growth. So if I take a look at the previous school year, the students who were in grade 10 had a scale score of 490. However, those 10th graders last year are now 11th graders this year. So as you go one forward, you would look at how they performed here, and those same students are up to a 512 average along the way. So we look at these results in two different ways. We look at how non-cohort students are working, but at the same time taking more value into, are our students growing? And are they growing to meet their overall goals of college and career readiness? Would you like me to go through another example? Okay, that's good. In mathematics, we again like to take a look at the same high. We did see that the expected growth was above national norms, which is always good, but the growth in mathematics was not as high as what we saw in evidence-based reading and writing. In this particular case, the average cohort growth at Coeur d'Alene High School was 31 points, 17 points at Lake City High School, 15 points at Venture High School.
And 30 points is the average national norm for growth, correct?
No, it was about 25.4 this last year. So if Coeur d'Alene High School is 31 points on average, Lake City 17, Venture 15. We did see better than average growth at Coeur d'Alene High School in mathematics, less than average growth at Lake City and Venture for that particular group of cohort students. So I wanted to try to break it down fairly easily for you. So this next table might help out. So you can see here along the way, the overall average cohort growth for students in our district this last year was 36.4. And you can actually break that down into average growth between evidence-based reading and writing and mathematics. And of course, you're going to have some ebb and flow with that, where some students are going to grow more than others in different subject areas. So I broke that down into two different things for you. First of all, we want to make sure our students actually growing. So the middle table identifies students who grew at least 1 point. There was no deficit growth at all. They were just moving along. 52% between the two cohorts actually did grow. 51% in reading and writing, 42% in math. Then we also are taking a look at, well, if this was the average growth, what percentage of kids are above that growth? 38.2% were greater than 36 points of growth in our schools. 38.6 higher, a little bit higher in evidence-based reading and writing. 35.6% of district students grew greater than 18 points in math. Again, preliminary at this particular point, we're going to be diving into a lot more of this information within our buildings. Looking at the college and career readiness benchmarks also, again, we like to look at growth within that. So if we look at a group of students at, for instance, Coeur d'Alene High School's 10th graders last year, this red bar, 53% of them met both of the benchmarks for this last year. But unfortunately, that same group of students, only 40% met both of those benchmarks this year. We did see some specific increases in mathematics, always good to see, but we did not see as consistent growth in evidence-based reading and writing as we would have liked to have seen. Why are we not meeting growth? Well, that's one of the areas that we look at as a cohort, and we look at it through the lens of system performance. So not only are we better tracking cohort students, we're also taking a look at who is not performing as well as we would like. We can, of course, look at the individual student, but are there some consistencies of what we're seeing? Females are well outperforming males on this particular assessment. Overall, 3% in both grades 10 and 11, but there's quite the gap in evidence-based reading and writing between females and males at grade 10. There's almost a 6% difference in performance at that grade level between males and females.
Mike, can I ask you a question on that slide? I was curious about the Coeur d'Alene High School because they had the most dramatic drop, it looks like, in meeting college benchmark.
So we were one more previous?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they went from 53 to 40.
42 in non-cohort, but matched 2 years previous at 42 also.
Right.
You're looking cohort, I think.
You're looking at 18 to the.
I'm looking at the 10th graders going.
And then they're the 11th.
She's looking cohort.
Yeah, the red bar down to the yellow bar, for example, is pretty striking.
Right, that's the bar I'm talking about.
53% down to 40%.
Yeah, 13% drop.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that we really need to talk to our building administrators and their building team leaders, and we need to disaggregate the results further to find out why that didn't happen. But, you know, looking at some of the results by ethnic group, by gender, is giving us some clues along the way. But I'll be able to have more responses back to you when we work with our building administrators and building teams shortly.
Yeah, it's hard to tell historically what that number's done, but if you just look at the little bit of snapshot that you can see, the 2 years, it's pretty significant change.
Agreed.
Right.
We've also recognized when we look at students of different ethnic subgroups that our students of American Indian and Alaskan Native heritage are struggling on this particular assessment. That's the second bar from the left. It's a kind of an orangish bar along the way. You can see as you compare total score, evidence-based reading and writing, and mathematics, they are certainly struggling comparative to other ethnic groups. So that's an area that we need to take a look at and see, is there something that we need to do to be able to better prepare those students for this assessment? Is there something that we're not reaching well enough to be able to make sure that they understand the importance of the assessment and also to make sure that they can do their best? Here's grade 11. Again, similar findings with our Native American students.
Mike, so we can, I guess, look at this data to give us some insight to how our students might perform on the SAT in the spring, correct?
Correct.
So
Grade 11 students.
Right. So is there a thought that we know these grade 11 students have had a 13% drop, and this is combined, right? This is math and English. Is it worth sorting out the two to see if there's one area that we could, assist them, or is it?
Absolutely, and that's where we're really going through and taking a look at a couple of different lenses. Number one, we have our student score reports. Our student score reports are now out. They're being passed out to individual students. The first thing that has to happen is we have to validate the work of that student by giving them their score report, helping them interpret it, and then also looking at the results at our lens as well. So it's not just looking at, well, how did one student perform? It's looking at how did students in a particular cohort, looking at it by students in particular courses. Are our students who are not being, are students not meeting their goals if they're in a particular section of a course? Those are the types of things that we can drill down to better now. But we're in the process of providing these score reports out to students, and one of the most important things is that on each report is a link to a specialized training course through Khan Academy. So each student has the ability to take their score and to apply the skills that they need to prepare with to excel on that coming SAT.
Mike, do you have any information about, I went and logged in and they have this new program that looks like it looks like it's for a fee, but it's like a tutoring. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? And they named it, wish I had the name, but I didn't know if it's something that you've checked out to see if it's worthwhile or.
I'm sorry, I have not. Would you send me some information or I can follow up with you?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your opinion on it.
I was not aware of anything specific with that. Most likely. The other thing that is great for us as a system is that we get what are called instructional planning reports. So this is a snapshot of what our teachers can download. Again, each of those students are going to be able to look at their score report as well as their original test booklet. So we can look back at question number 1. We can see that most students actually got it incorrect. 25% of district students got it correct, where 32% of the students in the state got it correct. We can actually open up that question. We can see the specific question that students got. We can identify each of those, and we can drill down into the related areas to find out where that's covered within our curricula and make sure that it's enhanced for the coming year.
Is that an actual report?
Yeah, it is. So again, we are glad to be able to answer any questions. It's a little early for us because these results have been shared with our building administrators, but we have not yet followed up with them to find out what they're doing with it. Most of the emphasis right now is getting the results back to the individual students. But we'll be working with our secondary administrators during their upcoming meeting. We'll be working with college and career advisors and making sure that everybody has all of the tools prepared for that coming SAT.
The one thing I wonder is, since it's kind of cumbersome to log in, do you think all students know how to log in to get their online results that then link them to the Khan Academy? Would it be something that we could offer assistance to those students that might not know how to set up an account or have access? Because students have had their scores now for 2 weeks maybe, those students that know how to access it. But I think that Khan Academy is really a nice resource and it's free, but you kind of have to know how to navigate it, and that seems like it could be difficult for some maybe.
We do have step-by-step instructions that we've provided to our college and career advisors. We've created a handout to say, here's where you go, here's what you do. Yeah. And access to that College Board account is essential because that is also the same portal that our students will be able to transmit their scores eventually to a college or university of their choosing. So having that established, linking it to their Khan Academy accounts, we have single sign-on in the district, so it makes it very easy for us to be able to get on to Khan Academy and access these tools. We do try to put that out there. If there's a better way of outreach that you feel like we can do, we're certainly open.
And providing kids time to access that. Some kids go home and they don't have a laptop or a desktop to just log in or internet even. So some form of access that we can provide for kids that don't have that. I know our libraries have great hours and stuff, but then that also is like, now they're not taking a bus home, so do they have someone? I mean, that's a whole nother issue. And I was briefly just saying to Lisa, I don't know if you guys have read any of those articles where a lot of colleges are not going by, SATs, or
Yes.
they're going by grades, and it's a lot of the reason is this, like, there's so many services out there that kids can pay for, and the ones that can do it, and I can't remember which one I was reading, but it was quite interesting, and they were saying that their grades that they get in their high school classes, core classes, are a bigger indicator of how successful they're going to be when they reach college. So I was just curious. I wonder how that's going to affect all of this stuff that we look at, because there are quite a few colleges, big colleges, that are going to that. It's a whole different, phone interview and lots of other different measures. So
We are certainly seeing that around the nation, where colleges and universities are looking at finding the best candidates for their entrance. What we are not seeing, however, is a lot of movement at the state level,
Yeah.
which has made this a graduation requirement. So while it's certainly good to be able to watch the trend, we have to kind of keep ourselves grounded in what is really expected of us as well. What else can I answer for you, or make sure that we emphasize with our building teams?
Now, just so I'm clear on the process when they're digging back into their scores, do they have to seek out their own counselor to go do that and say, I want to, or each counselor's reaching out, or they're doing this in certain classes?
Typically, they are building or bringing each of the students' score reports and their original score booklets classroom to classroom.
Okay.
And they're having a classroom conversation, say in an English class, whereby the college and career advisor or a counselor is going through an interpretation. We have a common presentation that we go through with that. They're going through each individual score report, and at that time, they're logging on to their Khan Academy accounts there.
In the classrooms, they're at least logging on at that point, in that moment, if they're there.
Right. And I think the key, though, however, is that we also need to make sure that it's not a one-time event, right? As we had heard from Trustee May, we want to make sure, or Trustee Pickford, we want to make sure that students can rely upon the information that they have, and that our teachers are using these great questions as part of their preparation as well for students.
Dr. Nelson, how are the instructional planning reports kind of being utilized now, and who leads that work at each school?
Yeah, they're accessible to anybody in the building leadership team or the building administration. So they can pull a report at Lake City High School specifically for a grade level, or for a group of students, or however they wish to do so. I would say it's mainly being used by building administration and building leaders. We do see some teachers, specifically in English language arts and mathematics, who are pulling those reports more consistently. But that could be a point of emphasis if you'd like me to work with that with Dr. Cottle also, as we prepare our secondary administrators in the next couple of weeks. We do provide a copy for them.
Curious, there's a difference between they're available or they're used. And so I guess that's what my question is, are they being used, and are they utilized to formulate instruction or practices? And then maybe kind of the second question I had is, does the district office look at this, and are you and Katie getting together and looking at this, and maybe on calculator math, district-wide, we're showing a deficiency there or whatever it is, and it's, wow, maybe we don't have enough calculator math or whatever it is. Is that
especially on the
work done?
assessment side of things, right? We commonly rely upon open questions like that to influence a lot of our EOCAs and those types of formative work along the way, common formative work. Certainly, as we go through the new curriculum development process, use of assessment data is essential for us to making sure that our courses are relevant, timely, and meeting student expectations. So all of those things are definitely part of the process. In terms of how they're being used, let me follow up with our building administrators and let's find out how they're being used to better answer your question.
And then, Katie, with the Math 1 group, sorry, Katie Groutman, There's too many Katies back there. But you all looked, so that's a good part of having lots of Katies. Is that like with Math 1, we're in year 2 of Math 1, so are they going back and looking at that? Is that math group that you have, are you guys looking at the PSAT results at all and just saying, geez, maybe we need to tweak Math 1 here a little bit, or we're falling short in this area?
Yeah, so we haven't yet, but as as I was just showing previously, our next meeting is directly related to assessment. And so we will definitely be talking about our results and how that can inform our next steps.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question on the calculator part. Do we provide calculators for kids that maybe don't show up on that day with their calculator or forgot it or just don't have one?
Yes, we do have
Thought we did, but I
sets
just
of
wanted to double
calculators
check.
that have been checked out to each building for that purpose.
Oh, perfect.
Both the PSAT and SAT. A great number of students do prefer their own calculator, but it does happen, so we have some available for students.
You were talking about access, you know, and I know Seth hasn't talked a lot about this yet, and I'm not going to pull him out, but I think there is opportunity now for kids to take laptops home, especially at the high school level, and I think to have internet access somehow too. I don't know if it's, but I think there's more of that available than there used to be through the district. Is that right? And it's the individual device has internet access?
There's hotspots as well as Chromebooks. Scott's only use the microphone.
And if Scott's
There
listening
are-
there, great photo. I'm really enjoying all of these. Awesome. I remember those kids from last year.
Try to personalize everything.
So Seth Dennison, Director of Technology, he said there's Chromebooks and
Hotspots?
Yes, that available for checkout at all the school libraries.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Nelson? Okay, thank you, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, policies for information. So these are coming to us for information tonight. These are going to be out for 30 days for public comment, and then we'll see them back next month. I don't think we need to go line by line, but in general, any questions, comments on any of these?
I do want to at least draw your attention to 3235. We're pretty excited about bringing that to you guys, and we're open to the ideas of feedback if there's something you have there. This would be the guiding principles for putting together our student advisory groups, and or if we're going to have a student that we're going to put on the dais or out in front or whatever, or groups of those students, however you see fit. These would be the policies, the procedures, and the forms and guidelines for that process. And if you recall back, gosh, what was it, about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, we had a student who requested that we consider this, and we're very supportive of the idea, and we'd like to give you guys a shot at this and let the community take a look at what we've produced.
I was excited to see that it's not just high school. That to me was one of the best parts.
That's interesting because that was one of the scariest things. I thought, how are we going to have elementary kids involved in this? But
High school will manage them.
Right. I was like, wow, elementary, really? Yeah. We need more recess.
So, Dr. Cook, one of the questions I had asked was the student advisory committee versus the student advisory group, and the response was that they're kind of the same. They're same. So, I guess I would suggest clarifying that piece in there, and just having one consistent term. And the other thing is, I love the idea. I was really just struggling conceptually of if you have multiple student advisory groups, how do you get? I couldn't understand, at least through policy, but maybe it comes in maybe it comes through procedure, there's more to come. Where do then those individual groups' input get provided through the one representative? I mean, do they all meet in some fashion? I just was confused about more procedure aspects of it, and maybe I'm preliminary in that concern.
No, I think it's a fair question. The one, you know, if if and when you would integrate a student voice into something, it would typically be somebody that's going to be contributing on a level that would require some understanding of the conversations that are going on, and not just the language of the conversations, but the context of what's being talked about. And so places where I've seen this be most effective, it is typically some form of leadership in a student advisory group. But then part of the obligation in being a leader in that capacity would also be to have some coordination with the I don't know structurally yet if it's going to wind up being 2 groups or 3 groups, but something that would provide them access to them, and so they're almost a liaison or a representative for the other younger student groups as well. And so we fully anticipate that being a part of student advisory, or more specifically, being a part of student advisory as the leadership of somebody that might serve as student voice here, means that they're also an obligation of that role to go back and connect with the groups. And I think what part of our role needs to be to let them take full responsibility of that and create. It's amazing to me what a 6-year-old child can advocate for, and let's give them that opportunity and let maybe a junior or a senior or sophomore, whoever's going to be the leader of that group, be responsible for how do they go access that information and bring that back to you guys. I think that's the kind of leadership we would aspire for every kid to have the opportunity for. So I am excited about that opportunity. We've not done it before, so I think we might have to grow as we develop this, but I do absolutely love the idea of K-12 advocacy and representation, and then having a student represent that group as an entirety and bring that voice here. And if there are questions that this entity wants to give through that person to that group, that they have that responsibility to present that. And I would also invite, I think that it's really important that there is a school board representative that accesses that group and interacts with that group. And quite frankly, I would wager that of all the committee work that you guys might be involved in, you may want a fist fight over this, because I'm pretty confident this will be the funnest one you get to be involved with.
Do you have an idea of number of participants, and is this one per building, or?
I not completely yet, but I think somewhere between the idea of, from our lens of managing these groups of folks, 20 to 30 kids would be a nice number of kids for us to get voices from, and then some leadership out of those in either subgroups of maybe elementary and secondary, or if we wanted to even break it further and go primary, middle, and high school, I think we can get that pulled off. And but creating an environment in which you have enough that you can have rich dialogue, but not so much that it inhibits the work of the purpose that committee or group would exist.
I do like that with the whole portrait of a graduate, that just kind of screams this whole part to me, in a way of instantly kind of modeling that, throughout the district, even of here we're listening to our kids. And I would encourage us to really deeply listen to the kids. I've been a part of things where we have kids or students honor stuff and it's maybe more token versus, oh no, the kids have a real voice, not just I show up and I share this and the adults don't listen to me anymore anyways, so why did I do this? But to deeply listen to these students that would volunteer to be a part of this. So.
And I would argue that these groups the board can work with these groups and task them with very real problems, and they will deliver very real solutions. It's powerful when it works.
Okay, a couple other policies on there. Any other questions on any of those? I have one. It's the last policy, 7311. And I don't know, when I think of policy, I think, well, let's word it where it's easily understood. And this one feels like we tried to do the opposite a little bit to me. Here's where I kind of take issue with it is no person employed by any public school district. So that's kind of the first one. And I'm guessing that was just blanket ISBA language. And pretty sure we're not concerned about someone who works for Post Falls selling us stuff. So can we just say Coeur d'Alene School District? And that's there a few times. And then just kind of the, right after that comma, it talks, no person employed by any public school district shall, either as principal or as an agent, sell or offer to sell to pupils. And I just think principal, or people are going to think, oh, this only applies to principals. And I get in from a business lens what principal and agent is talking about there, but is that just too wordy for our purpose? And does that just mean, you can't work for someone else and sell stuff to the district if you work for the district or to our students? Yeah. So it just was a little, I think, confusing there. Does that, like, tutoring fall under that? Like tutoring, like if a teacher couldn't offer a tutoring service, then? Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Pay close attention at the bottom of your agenda there. Important dates. There's a lot of meetings this month and next month and the month after. So, but we've got all January there. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Meeting adjourned.